there is an elf who crosses Middle-earth on foot, from the dark boughs of Mirkwood to the white cliffs of the sea, and who sees, along the way, more of the mortal world than almost any elf has ever seen. He walks through mountain passes and ancient forests and underground kingdoms. He rides across plains and sails down rivers and marches through the lands of the dead. He fights in battles that decide the fate of the world, befriends a dwarf, and stands at the black gate of Mordor when the eye falls and the dark tower crumbles and the age of the elves comes to its end. And then he keeps traveling. After the war, after the ring, after the world has been saved and the mortals have begun their dominion over it, after all of this, Legolas keeps moving. He cannot stop. He has heard the cry of the gulls over Pelagia, and the sound has awakened something inside him that will never go back to sleep. The sea longing, the ancient call that pulls every elf toward the west, toward the undying lands, toward the home that no elf born in Middle-earth has ever seen, but that every elf, in the deepest part of their spirit, recognizes. Tonight I want to trace the complete journey, from the beginning to the end, from the first shadows of Mirkwood to the last shores of the mortal world. Because Legolas's story is not merely a travelogue, it is the story of an elf who was forced, by circumstance and by choice, to walk through a world that was dying, a world in which the elves were fading, in which the forests were shrinking, in which the ancient and the beautiful were being replaced by the young and the mortal. Legolas's travels are the travels of a being saying goodbye to a world, walking through it one last time, seeing everything, touching everything, before the ship carries him away and the world belongs to men. Stay with me. This is the story of every step, every mile, every road and river and battlefield that Legolas crossed. And it is the story of what the crossing cost him, what it meant to be the elf who saw the most and who lost the most, and who in the end had to choose between the world he loved and the call he could not resist. Part 1. The Forest of Shadows. Legolas Greenleaf, son of Thranduil, prince of the Woodland Realm, an elf of the trees, born in the forest, raised in the forest, shaped by the rhythms and the dangers of a forest that was, during his lifetime, slowly being consumed by darkness. Mirkwood, the name itself, tells the story. The forest was not always called Mirkwood. It was once called Greenwood the Great, a vast, ancient, magnificent forest that stretched across the northern reaches of Middle-earth, one of the oldest and most beautiful natural spaces in the world. Greenwood was home to the Sylvan Elves, the Wood Elves, the rustic, earthy, nature-loving branch of the elven family, who lived close to the land, and who found their joy in the growing things, in the turning of the seasons, in the simple, ancient pleasures of the forest. And then the shadow came. Around the year 1000 of the Third Age, roughly 2,000 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings, a dark power established itself in the southern reaches of the forest. The power built a fortress called Dol Guldur, and the fortress radiated darkness the way a fire radiates heat, spreading corruption outward through the trees, poisoning the air, driving the light from the canopy, turning Greenwood the Great into Mirkwood. The dark power was Sauron. Sauron, in one of his many disguises, had taken up residence in the forest and had begun the long, patient, centuries-spanning process of rebuilding his power after the defeat at the end of the Second Age. And the forest suffered for it. The trees darkened, the animals changed, grew hostile, grew dangerous, grew strange. Giant spiders colonized the southern reaches. The paths became treacherous. The light dimmed. The great green forest became a place of fear. Legolas grew up in this forest. He was born into a world that was under siege, a world in which the darkness was always pressing, always encroaching, always pushing the borders of his father's kingdom a little further back. The Woodland Realm of Thranduil occupied the northern portion of Mirkwood, the portion that was still relatively free from the Shadow's influence. But relatively free is not the same as safe. The darkness was always there, a presence on the horizon, a weight in the air, a reminder that the world was not what it had been and was not going to get better. Part 2. The Son of Thranduil. Thranduil is one of the most interesting and most misunderstood rulers in Middle-earth. He is proud, he is fierce, he is territorial, and he is, beneath the arrogance and the aloofness, deeply, profoundly committed to the survival of his people in a world that is trying to destroy them. Thranduil is a Sindarin elf, a grey elf, a descendant of the ancient elven kindreds who remained in Middle-earth when the others journeyed to the Blessed Realm. Thranduil rules over the Sylvan Elves, the Wood Elves, the more rustic and less powerful branch of the elven family. The arrangement is old, Sindarin nobles ruling over Sylvan populations, a political structure that dates back to the early days of the Second Age. Legolas is the son of this king. And the position, Prince of the Woodland Realm, heir to the throne of the most besieged elven kingdom in Middle-earth, shaped Legolas in ways that the story only hints at. Thranduil's kingdom operates under a siege mentality. The borders are guarded. The forests are patrolled. The elves of Mirkwood live in a state of permanent vigilance, watching for spiders, watching for orcs, watching for the creeping advance of the darkness that has been pressing against their borders for 2,000 years. This is not the leisured, philosophical, art-creating elven civilization of Rivendell or Lothlorien. This is a warrior culture, a community that survives through combat readiness, through constant alertness, through the willingness to fight for every tree and every mile of forest. Legolas is a product of this culture. The archery, the incredible, seemingly supernatural archery that makes Legolas one of the most dangerous warriors in the Fellowship, is not a party trick. It is the product of centuries of training in a forest where the ability to put an arrow through an orc's eye at 50 paces is not a talent but a survival requirement. The bow is the weapon of the Woodland Realm, because the bow is the weapon of the forest. The elves of Mirkwood fight among the trees, in the branches, on the paths, in the dense undergrowth where swords are clumsy and spears are too long, and the only weapon that works is the weapon that can strike from a distance, from cover, from the height of a branch overlooking a spider's approach. Legolas learned to fight in the forest. Every arrow he fires in The Lord of the Rings, at Moria, at Helm's Deep, at Pelennor Fields, carries the muscle memory of a lifetime spent defending the trees of Mirkwood against the darkness that was trying to devour them. Part 3. The Darkness of Home. Before we trace Legolas's journey through the story of the ring, we need to understand the journey he had already made, the journey through the long centuries of Mirkwood's decline, through the slow, grinding, decade-by-decade experience of watching his home darken. Tolkien does not give us Legolas's age. This is deliberate. Tolkien is careful to leave the specific dates of Legolas's birth unspecified, which makes it impossible to know exactly how many years Legolas has lived and how much of Mirkwood's history he has personally witnessed. But we can infer from context that Legolas is old enough to have seen centuries of the forest's deterioration, old enough to have experienced the gradual loss of territory and light that defines his people's existence. The experience of living in a darkening forest for centuries would shape anyone. It would create a being who is simultaneously rooted and restless, rooted in the love of the place, in the deep, intimate, personal connection to the trees and the soil and the life of the forest, and restless with the knowledge that the place is dying, that the beauty is fading, that the darkness is winning the slow war that has been waged against the forest for 2,000 years. The forest taught Legolas to fight in the dark, not merely in the physical darkness, not merely the absence of light that comes with night and with the canopies thickening, but in the spiritual darkness, the moral darkness, the shadow that falls across a land when the force that is poisoning it is too strong to be defeated and too patient to be outlasted. The elves of Mirkwood did not fight with the expectation of victory. They fought with the determination to hold, to endure, to maintain the borders one more day, one more year, one more decade, knowing that the darkness would return and that the fight would never truly end. This is the disposition that Legolas carries into the Fellowship. The willingness to fight without the promise of victory. The capacity to endure a struggle that has no foreseeable end. The Mirkwood temperament, stubborn, vigilant, accustomed to the long defeat, is the temperament that allows Legolas to march to the Black Gate and to stand before the hosts of Mordor without the guarantee that the sacrifice will accomplish anything. The elves of Mirkwood have been making sacrifices without guarantees for 2,000 years. The Black Gate is familiar territory. Legolas carries this duality throughout The Lord of the Rings. He is the elf who loves the world and who knows that the world is ending. He is the being who finds beauty in every landscape and who sees, behind the beauty, the shadow that is consuming it. He is the member of the Fellowship who is most attuned to the natural world, and who is also most aware that the natural world is passing, that the forests are shrinking, that the ancient places are fading, that the world he was born into is being replaced by a world that will belong to others. The duality makes Legolas one of the most poignant characters in the story. More poignant, I think, than most readers realize. Legolas is not simply the elf with the bow. He is a being caught between two griefs, the grief of watching his home die behind him, and the grief of knowing that the world ahead of him, however beautiful, is not his and never will be. Part 4. The Forest Path. Legolas's first significant journey in the story of the Ring is the journey he makes before the story begins. The journey from Mirkwood to Rivendell, carrying news that changes the course of the war. Gollum has escaped. The creature, Sméagol, the hobbit-like being who carried the One Ring for nearly 500 years in the tunnels under the Misty Mountains, had been captured by Aragorn and brought to the Elves of Mirkwood for safekeeping. The capture was a significant intelligence achievement. Gollum knew where the ring had gone, and his testimony had confirmed Gandalf's suspicion that Bilbo's magic ring was the One Ring of Sauron. Thranduil's elves imprisoned Gollum. They held him in the forest, not in dungeons, because the wood elves did not maintain dungeons of the kind that dwarves or men might build, but in a guarded enclosure among the trees, where Gollum was allowed to climb a single tree and was watched by elvish guards. The imprisonment was humane by the standards of Middle-earth. The elves treated Gollum with a measure of pity, recognizing, perhaps, that the creature was as much a victim as a villain, that the ring had done more to Gollum than Gollum had done to himself, and Gollum escaped. He was rescued, or, more precisely, he was liberated, by a force of orcs that attacked the elvish guards during one of the periods when Gollum was allowed to climb his tree. The attack was swift and coordinated, suggesting that someone had sent the orcs specifically to free Gollum. The guards were killed. Gollum fled into the darkness, and the most dangerous prisoner in the Woodland Realm was loose. Legolas was sent to Rivendell to bring this news. And the journey from Mirkwood to Rivendell across hundreds of miles of wilderness was Legolas's first great passage through the wider world. The journey took him through the high pass of the Misty Mountains, down through the valleys on the western side, and into the hidden valley of Imladris, Rivendell, the last homely house. the seat of Elrond half-elven. The journey was dangerous. The misty mountains were crawling with orcs. The passes were treacherous. The land between Mirkwood and Rivendell was wild, largely uninhabited, and full of the kinds of hazards that would challenge even an elf of Legolas's skill. But Legolas made the journey, because the news had to be delivered, because the safety of the free world depended on Elrond and Gandalf knowing that Gollum was loose, because the chain of events that would lead to the Council of Elrond and the formation of the Fellowship required this specific piece of information to arrive at this specific place at this specific time. The journey to Rivendell was Legolas's introduction to the world beyond the forest. For centuries, perhaps for his entire life, Legolas had operated within the borders of the Woodland Realm. His world was Mirkwood. His horizon was the canopy. His experience of geography was limited to the paths and the clearings and the spider-haunted reaches of his father's domain. The crossing of the Misty Mountains shattered that limitation. The mountains showed Legolas a world that was vertical, where his world had been horizontal. A world of peaks and cliffs and windswept passes, where the air was thin and the views stretched to the edge of the world and the sky was closer than it had ever been in the sheltered corridors of the forest. The descent into the valley of Rivendell showed Legolas another kind of elven civilization, different from Mirkwood, more refined, more scholarly, more connected to the deep history of the elven race. Rivendell was not a forest kingdom. It was a library, a house of healing, a repository of knowledge and memory and the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years. The elves of Rivendell spoke of things that the wood elves of Mirkwood rarely discussed, of the Silmarils, of the wars of the First Age, of the great deeds and the great tragedies that shaped the world before the Woodland Realm existed. The arrival at Rivendell expanded Legolas. It showed him that the elven world was larger and more complex than Mirkwood's borders had suggested. It introduced him to elves whose experience and whose perspective were different from his own. Elves who had seen the light of Valinor, who had fought in the wars of the Elder Days, who carried memories that made Legolas's centuries of forest life seem brief and provincial. The expansion was the beginning. The Council of Elrond would expand Legolas further, far further than Rivendell had, far further than the crossing of the mountains had, far further than anything in Legolas's previous experience could have prepared him for. Part 5. The Council. Legolas arrives at Rivendell, and what he finds there changes his life. The Council of Elrond brings together the representatives of the free peoples, elves, dwarves, men and a hobbit, to discuss the crisis that the ring has created. And at the council, Legolas hears the full scope of the danger for the first time. He has known about the shadow in Mirkwood. He has fought the spiders and the orcs. He has lived under the threat of Dol Guldur for his entire life. But the council reveals to Legolas that the threat is not merely regional. The shadow over Mirkwood is a symptom of a global crisis. A crisis that encompasses not just his forest, but the entire world. Every kingdom, every people, every living thing in Middle-earth. The ring has been found. The ring is in Rivendell. The ring must be destroyed. And someone must carry it to the only place where it can be destroyed. The fires of Mount Doom. In the heart of Mordor. At the council, Legolas also encounters something unexpected. A dwarf. Gimli, son of Glyn, is present at the council as a representative of the dwarven kingdoms. And the encounter is not friendly. The enmity between elves and dwarves is ancient, stretching back to the First Age, to the destruction of Doriath, to the murder of Thingol, to the accumulated grudges and grievances that have built up over thousands of years of mutual hostility. Thranduil's relationship with the dwarves is particularly strained. The incident with Thorin's company, the imprisonment of the dwarves in the caverns of the Woodland Realm, the dispute over the dragon's treasure at the Lonely Mountain. These events are recent history. They are within living memory. And Gimli's father, Glyn, was one of the dwarves that Thranduil imprisoned. Legolas looks at Gimli and sees an enemy. Gimli looks at Legolas and sees the son of the king who locked his father in a cell. The hostility is immediate, visceral, and deeply personal, rooted not merely in racial prejudice but in specific, concrete, individually experienced grievances. Neither of them knows, at this point, that they will become the closest friends in the history of elf-dwarf relations. Neither of them knows that the journey ahead will transform the hostility into something unprecedented, a bond of loyalty and love and mutual respect that will last beyond the mortal lifespan of one of them and into the eternity that awaits the other. Neither of them knows that Legolas will eventually bring Gimli with him to the Undying Lands, that the dwarf he is currently glaring at across the council chamber will be the companion with whom he sails into the west, the friend who will cross the final threshold at his side. The journey changes everything. But the journey has not started yet. Part 6. The Fellowship forms. 9 walkers, 9 companions chosen to oppose the 9 riders, the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths, the 9 servants of Sauron who represent the pinnacle of the Dark Lord's power. The number is deliberate. The symmetry is deliberate. The message is deliberate. The free peoples will match the Dark Lord's 9 with 9 of their own, not 9 kings enslaved by rings, but 9 free beings who choose to walk into the darkness. Legolas is chosen as the representative of the elves. Not chosen by Elrond exactly. The members of the Fellowship volunteer each for their own reasons. Legolas volunteers because he has seen the darkness in Mirkwood. He has lived with it. He has fought it. He knows what the shadow is and what it does to the world. And he is willing to walk toward the source of that shadow because he has spent his entire life walking toward the smaller shadows that it casts. The composition of the Fellowship places Legolas in a unique position. He is the only elf. He is the only immortal. He is the only being in the group who has lived for centuries, who carries the weight of deep memory, who has seen ages pass and kingdoms rise and fall, who experiences time on a scale that the other members of the Fellowship cannot imagine. This makes Legolas both an asset and an outsider. His elven senses, the sight that can see for leagues, the hearing that can detect an approaching enemy before any man or hobbit or dwarf, the lightness of step that allows him to walk on snow without sinking, make him invaluable as a scout and a fighter. But his immortality creates a distance. Legolas does not age. He does not tire in the way that mortals tire. He does not feel the cold or the hunger or the physical exhaustion that weighs on the other members of the Fellowship. He is, in a very real sense, a being of a different order, a being who is passing through the mortal world, who will outlive everyone in the group, who will remember this journey when the others are dust. The distance is present from the beginning. But the journey will close it. Mile by mile, danger by danger, the shared experience of the road will break down the barriers between the immortal and the mortals, and the being who starts the journey as an outsider will end it as a friend, a brother, a companion who has been changed by the mortal world in ways that he never expected and can never undo. Part 7. The Road South. The Fellowship departs Rivendell on December 25, a date that Tolkien, a devout Catholic, chose with deliberate significance. They head south, following the western side of the Misty Mountains, making for the Gap of Rohan or the passes through the mountains, depending on which route proves safest. The first leg of the journey is through the wilderness south of Rivendell, through Hollin, the ancient elvish realm of Eregion, where the rings of power were forged in the Second Age. This is Legolas's first experience of a landscape that carries the imprint of his people's history. The history of the Noldor, the High Elves. The craftsmen who worked with Sauron to create the rings that would bring so much beauty and so much suffering to the world. Legolas reads the landscape. He senses the stones and the wind and the ancient memory that saturates the land. The holly trees of Hollin, Eregion means land of holly, still remember the elves who once lived here. Legolas speaks of this, tells the others that the stones lament, that the trees remember, that the land itself carries the grief of the elves' departure. He can hear what the others cannot, the deep, slow geological sadness of a landscape that has lost the beings who gave it meaning. This is Legolas's gift and Legolas's burden. He perceives the world at a depth that the mortals around him cannot access. He hears the trees speak. He reads the mood of the wind. He senses the age and the history and the emotional charge of the land through which they pass. The perception is beautiful. It is also painful. Because the beauty is faded. The glory is past. The elves are gone from Hollin, and the land that remembers them is grieving. And Legolas, the elf who is still here, who is still walking through the mortal world, is the audience for a grief that will never end. The passage through Hollin also introduces Legolas to the birds that are spying on them, Crebain from Dunland, flocks of black crows sent by Saruman to scout the Fellowship's position. Legolas spots them first, of course. His eyes, sharper than any mortal's, pick out the approaching birds and raise the alarm. The Fellowship hides. The birds pass. But the message is clear. They are being watched. The enemy knows they are moving. The road south is not safe. Part 8. The Mountain. Caradhras, the Redhorn. The mountain that refuses to be crossed. The Fellowship attempts to cross the Misty Mountains via the Redhorn Pass, a high, dangerous, storm-swept route that runs over the shoulder of Caradhras, one of the 3 great mountains that guard the entrance to Moria. And the mountain fights them. The storm that hits the Fellowship on Caradhras is one of the most vivid and most physically demanding sequences in the journey. The snow is blinding. The wind is lethal. The cold is killing. Literally killing. As the hobbits and the men struggle to survive in conditions that their bodies were not built to endure. The Fellowship is driven back. The mountain wins. And Legolas, during this sequence, demonstrates the quality that most clearly distinguishes him from the other members of the group. He walks on the snow. The Fellowship is wading through drifts that reach their waists, their chests, their necks. The hobbits are being carried. The men are exhausted. Gimli is struggling. And Legolas walks on the surface of the snow, light as a feather, unburdened, untouched by the weight that drags the others down. He runs ahead, scouts the path, returns, reports. He is, in this moment, the most visible reminder that the elf is not like the others, that the being who walks beside them is a being of a different nature, a being whose relationship with the physical world is fundamentally unlike their own. The snow walking is not a superpower in the comic book sense. It is a quality of being, a reflection of the elven nature, the lightness, the spiritual buoyancy that keeps elves from sinking into the physical world the way that mortals do. Legolas does not struggle with the mountain, because Legolas is not fully subject to the mountain's laws. He is passing through, lightly, gracefully, without the weight that mortal existence imposes. The lightness is literal and metaphorical. Legolas passes through the world lightly, because Legolas is not of the world, not fully, not permanently, not in the way that mortals are. He is a traveller, a visitor a being who will eventually leave, who will sail west and depart Middle-earth and join the elves in the Blessed Realm. The snow walking on Caradhras is a physical expression of this metaphysical reality. Legolas does not sink into Middle-earth because Middle-earth is not his final home. The mountain defeats the Fellowship. They cannot cross Caradhras. The storm is too strong, the cold too lethal, the passes too blocked. And so the Fellowship faces the decision that will change the course of the journey. They must go under the mountain. They must go through Moria. Part 9. The Dread of Moria. Moria, Hazard Diem. The Black Pit. The ancient kingdom of the dwarves. The greatest and the most terrible underground realm in Middle-earth. Legolas does not want to enter Moria. The text makes this clear, though it does so quietly. Legolas voices his unease, his reluctance, his instinctive aversion to the idea of going underground. The aversion is deep. It is primal. It is rooted in the elven nature, the nature that finds joy in the open sky, in the light of the stars, in the movement of the wind through the leaves of the trees. Moria is the antithesis of everything that an elf values. Moria is enclosed, lightless, separated from the sky, buried beneath thousands of feet of stone. Moria is a tomb. And Moria is a dwarven place. This matters. The relationship between elves and dwarves is complicated at the best of times, and the relationship between the woodland elves and the dwarves is particularly fraught. For Legolas to enter Moria, to walk voluntarily into the greatest achievement of dwarven civilization, into the halls that were carved by the hands of the people his father distrusted and imprisoned, is an act of courage that goes beyond the physical. The physical courage is significant too. Moria is full of orcs, of goblins, of the unnamed things that live in the deep places of the earth. And there is something else, something that even the orcs are afraid of, something that dwells in the deepest darkness of the abandoned kingdom, and that has been lurking there since the dwarves dug too deep and woke it from its ancient sleep. But Legolas enters Moria, because the Fellowship enters Moria. This is the first major test of the bond, the first moment when Legolas's commitment to the group overrides his personal comfort, his racial instincts, his natural aversion. The Fellowship is going underground. Legolas goes with them. Not happily, not willingly in the fullest sense, but he goes. Because the mission requires it. Because the others are going. Because the being who walked on the snow above the mountain is now going to walk through the darkness below it, and the willingness to do both, to go up and to go down, to face the mountain and the mine, to walk on the surface and in the depths, is the measure of his commitment. The irony of the situation is palpable. A wood elf, a being whose entire culture, whose entire identity, whose every instinct is oriented toward the open sky and the living forest, walking voluntarily into a dwarf kingdom under a mountain. A prince of Mirkwood, descending into the domain of the dwarves his father distrusted. The very landscape is hostile to everything Legolas is. The stone ceiling blocks the stars. The enclosed walls block the wind. The silence, the deep, mineral, lifeless silence of abandoned corridors, blocks the sounds of the forest that have been Legolas's constant companions since birth. And yet Legolas goes. He walks through the door. He enters the darkness. He descends into the earth. And the descent is not merely physical. It is psychological, spiritual. A test of whether the elf can function in an environment that contradicts every aspect of his nature. The darkness of Moria is not like the darkness of Mirkwood. The darkness of Mirkwood is alive, full of spiders and orcs and the rustling of hostile creatures, but alive. The darkness of Moria is dead. The emptiness of abandoned halls. The silence of empty chambers. The cold, still, lightless vacuum of a civilization that has been extinguished. Legolas endures. He does not enjoy. The text makes clear that every moment in Moria is uncomfortable for the elf, but he endures. And the endurance is itself a form of growth. The being who entered Moria as a forest creature exits Moria as something more. A being who has proven that he can function outside his element, that his identity is not limited to the forest, that the elf who loves the trees can also walk through the stone and survive. Part 10. The Bridge of Khazad Diem. In Moria, Legolas sees something that changes him. He sees the Balrog. The sequence is the most dramatic in the entire Fellowship of the Ring. The discovery of Balin's tomb, the attack by orcs and cave trolls, the flight through the halls, the arrival at the Bridge of Khazad Diem, and the confrontation between Gandalf and the ancient horror that rises from the deep. Legolas recognizes the Balrog. The text tells us that when the creature appears, wreathed in fire and shadow, a being of immense and terrible power, Legolas identifies it. He speaks the name I, a Balrog. A Balrog is come. The recognition is immediate. The terror is immediate. And the terror is significant, because Legolas is not a being who frightens easily. He is a warrior of centuries' experience. He has fought orcs and spiders and the creatures of the dark forest. But the Balrog terrifies him. Why? Because Legolas knows what a Balrog is. He knows the history of the First Age, the wars against Morgoth, the battles in which Balrogs slaughtered elven lords and destroyed elven kingdoms. The Balrog is not merely a monster. It is a Maya, a being of the same order as Gandalf, a fallen spirit of immense power that has been corrupted by the original Dark Lord and that has been sleeping in the deep places of the earth since the destruction of Morgoth's fortress. Legolas drops his arrow. The text notes this. The arrow that Legolas has nocked falls from his fingers when the Balrog appears. This is a being who never misses, who never fumbles, who handles his bow with the absolute certainty of centuries of practice. And the Balrog makes him drop his arrow. The detail is small but devastating. It tells us the depth of the terror, the magnitude of the threat, the absolute overwhelming, arrow-dropping horror of confronting a being that belongs to the mythology rather than to the present. And then Gandalf falls. Gandalf faces the Balrog on the Bridge of Khazad Diem, breaks the bridge, and falls into the abyss with the creature. The wizard, who was the Fellowship's guide, protector, and leader, the being who was holding the group together, who was making the decisions, who was the reason the others felt capable of continuing, is gone. Legolas's grief is the grief of a being who has known Gandalf for centuries. The mortals in the Fellowship have known Gandalf for years or decades. Legolas has known him for far longer. Gandalf has been a presence in the Woodland Realm, a visitor, a counselor, a friend to the Elves of Mirkwood for generations of mortal time. The loss of Gandalf is not merely the loss of a leader. For Legolas, it is the loss of a fixture, a constant in the ever-changing world. A being who was always there, who always came back, who always had the wisdom and the courage that the situation required. Gandalf is gone. And the Fellowship, bereft and broken, stumbles out of Moria into the daylight, into the air and the sky and the open world that Legolas has been craving since they entered the darkness under the mountain. The light hits them. The grief hits them. And the journey continues, because the journey must continue, because the ring is still in Frodo's pocket, and Mordor is still the destination, and the world will not save itself. Part 11. The Golden Wood. Lothlorien, the Elven Forest. the place where Legolas, for the first time in the story, feels at home. The Fellowship crosses the Silverlode and enters the eaves of Lurien, the great Malorn forest, the realm of Galadriel and Celeborn, the last and most beautiful of the elven kingdoms in Middle-earth. And the entrance is, for Legolas, like stepping into a dream. Lothlorien is everything that Mirkwood used to be. The trees are tall and golden. The air is clean. The light, the specific, luminous, amber and silver light that filters through the golden leaves of the Malorn trees is the light of a world that has not been touched by the shadow. Lothlorien is preserved. It is protected by Galadriel's power, by the ring Nenya that she wears, by the strength of her will and the depth of her love for the land. Lothlorien is what Greenwood the Great once was, before Sauron came, and the darkness descended, and the great forest became Mirkwood. But the arrival is not simple. The Fellowship is challenged at the borders by Haldir and the Galadrim, the elven border guard. And the challenge involves a complication: Gimli. The elves of Lothlorien are reluctant to admit a dwarf. The ancient enmity, the grudge that stretches back to the First Age, the mutual distrust that has been reinforced by centuries of separate development, makes the elves of Lurien uncomfortable with the presence of a dwarf in their sacred forest. Legolas finds himself in an unexpected position. He defends Gimli. Not enthusiastically, not yet. The friendship has not developed to that point. But he argues for Gimli's admission. He insists that the Fellowship must stay together, that the dwarf is a member of the company, that the mission overrides the racial prejudice. The defense is pragmatic rather than personal. But it is the first step, the first small, barely perceptible movement toward the friendship that will eventually become one of the defining relationships in the story. Once admitted, the full beauty of Lothlorien opens before Legolas, and entering it is like coming home to a home he has never visited. The forest speaks to him. The trees welcome him. The ancient, deep, elvish quality of the land resonates with the elvish quality in his own nature, the part of him that loves trees and starlight and the slow, patient rhythms of the natural world. Lothlorien is the embodiment of everything that Legolas values, and the encounter with it fills him with both joy and sorrow. Joy because the beauty is real, sorrow because the beauty is fading, because Lothlorien is a relic, because the golden wood will not last. Legolas walks among the Malorn trees and feels, for the first time since leaving Mirkwood, the deep comfort that only a forest can provide to an elf. The comfort is not merely aesthetic, it is physiological, it is spiritual. The trees of Lothlorien speak to Legolas in the language that trees use, the slow, deep, sap and root language of growing things that the elves can hear and that mortals cannot. And the language says, "You are welcome here. You belong here." This is a place where the elven spirit can rest. The rest is temporary. Legolas knows it. The Fellowship cannot stay in Lothlorien. The mission continues. The ring must be carried south. The brief interlude in the Golden Wood is a pause, not a destination. A moment of grace in the middle of a journey that will take the travelers into landscapes that are far less welcoming. But the memory of Lothlorien will remain. The memory of the golden light, the Malorn trees, the slow elven songs drifting through the branches. This memory will be one of the things that Legolas carries with him for the rest of the journey and the rest of his life. The memory of Lothlorien is the standard, the benchmark of beauty, the reference point against which every other landscape will be measured and found, however beautiful to be less. Part 12. The Gifts of Lurien. In Lothlorien, the Fellowship rests. They grieve for Gandalf. They recover their strength. They receive gifts from Galadriel, gifts that will prove essential in the journey ahead. Legolas's gift is a bow of the Galadrim, a great longbow of Lothlorien strung with elven hair, a weapon that is superior to the bow he carried from Mirkwood. The gift is practical. It is also symbolic. The bow of Lothlorien represents a transfer, a connection between the elven kingdoms, a bond between the Woodland Realm and the Golden Wood, a physical expression of the solidarity that unites the elves across their scattered and diminishing domains. But the most significant thing that happens to Legolas in Lothlorien is not the gift. It is the experience of the place itself, the extended immersion in an elven landscape that is complete, that is whole, that has not been darkened by the shadow. Legolas has lived his entire life in a forest under siege. In Lothlorien, he experiences what a forest should be, what Mirkwood once was, what the world was like before the darkness came. The experience is transformative. It gives Legolas a standard, a reference point, a memory of perfection against which every other landscape he encounters will be measured. The experience also deepens Legolas's grief. Because Lothlorien is doomed. Galadriel knows it. Celeborn knows it. The elves of Lúthien know it. The power that preserves the Golden Wood is Galadriel's ring, Nenya. And Nenya's power will fade when the One Ring is destroyed. The destruction of the One Ring, which is the purpose of the Fellowship's mission, will also be the death sentence of Lothlorien. The victory that saves the world will also destroy the most beautiful place in it. Legolas understands this. He understands the paradox, the cruel, unavoidable, mathematically precise paradox that the mission he is helping to accomplish will destroy the thing he loves most. The elven world is ending. The ring's destruction will accelerate the ending. And the elf who is carrying a bow of Lothlorien through the wilds of Middle-earth is carrying a weapon made by a civilization that his own mission will help to end. Part 13. The River. The Fellowship leaves Lothlorien in boats, elven boats, light and graceful, paddling down the Anduin, the great river, toward an uncertain destination. The river journey is Legolas's first experience of a specific kind of travel, the passive, current-carried, destination-unclear movement of beings who are being borne by forces larger than themselves. The river carries the Fellowship south. The current decides the pace. The water determines the route. The travelers are passengers, riders on a flow that they can steer but cannot stop. That moves them toward the south, and toward the decisions that will break the Fellowship apart. Legolas paddles. He steers. He watches the banks. And he sees, because Legolas always sees, the landscape changing as the river carries them south. The golden trees of Lothlorien give way to the brown hills of the Emyn Muil. The elvish landscape gives way to the landscape of men. The protected, preserved, Galadriel, sustained beauty of the Golden Wood yields to the raw, unprotected, shadow-threatened terrain of the wider world. The transition is important for Legolas because it is a passage from one world to another, from the elven world to the mortal world, from the preserved to the decaying, from the golden to the brown. Every mile down the Anduin takes Legolas further from the places that feel like home, and deeper into the places that feel like somewhere else. The lands of men, the territories of the mortal peoples, the spaces where the trees do not remember the elves and the stones do not sing. On the river, the Fellowship passes the Argonath, the pillars of the kings, the great statues of Isildur and Anrion that guard the northern approach to Gondor. The statues are the work of men, that Nadain, the Enmenrians, the greatest builders of the mortal world. And the statues are impressive. Even Legolas, the elf who has seen the work of elven craftsmen, recognizes the grandeur of the Argonath. But the statues are also old. They are weathered. They are crumbling, slowly, imperceptibly. in the way that everything built by mortals crumbles. The Argonath is a monument to a greatness that has faded. The kings who carved these statues are dead. The kingdom they ruled has diminished. The grandeur that the statues represent is a memory carved in stone, but a memory nonetheless. Legolas sees this. The elf who has watched the forests fade now watches the monuments of men fade too. Everything fades. Everything diminishes. Everything passes, elven and mortal, forest and stone, the beautiful and the grand. The river carries the fellowship south, and the river carries Legolas deeper into the grief of a world that is losing everything. Part 14. The Breaking. Amon Hen. The Hill of Sight, the place where the fellowship breaks. Boromir, driven by the ring's influence, attacks Frodo. Frodo puts on the ring and escapes. And then the orcs arrive, Saruman's Uruk-hai, sent specifically to capture the hobbits, crashing through the forest on the western bank of the river. Legolas fights. He fights with the precision and the lethality that define him, arrow after arrow, each one finding its target, each one dropping an Uruk-hai with the mechanical, rhythmic efficiency of a being who has been killing orcs for centuries. But the fight is overwhelming. The Uruk-hai are too many. The fellowship is scattered. Boromir falls. He dies defending Merry and Pippin, redeeming himself with his final act, dying with multiple arrows in his body. When Legolas and Aragorn and Gimli find him, he is dying, speaking his last words to Aragorn, confessing his failure, acknowledging Aragorn as his king. The death of Boromir is the Fellowship's first mortal loss. Boromir is gone. He is dead. He will not come back. And Legolas, the immortal, watches a mortal die for the first time in the story, watches the life leave a man's body, watches the breath stop, watches the eyes close. The experience is important because it prefigures everything that will come. Legolas will watch more mortals die. He will watch the men of Rohan fall at Helm's Deep. He will watch the defenders die at Pelennor Fields. He will watch the soldiers perish at the Black Gate. And eventually, years later, decades later, in the long, slow aftermath of the war, he will watch his dearest friend, Gimli, grow old and approach the death that awaits all mortal beings. But at Amon Hen, the experience is new. Boromir's death introduces Legolas to the specific, intimate, personal grief of mortal loss. The grief of watching a being you know, a being you have travelled with and fought beside and shared meals with, cease to exist. The grief is different from the grief of Gandalf's fall, because Gandalf may come back, but Boromir is gone. The man is gone. The son of Denethor, the captain of Gondor, the being who was brave and flawed and human, he is gone. And the going is permanent. And the permanence is something that Legolas, the immortal, must learn to absorb. The fellowship breaks. Frodo and Sam take a boat across the river and head for Mordor alone. Merry and Pippin are captured by the Uruk-hai, and Legolas, Aragorn and Gimli stand on the bank of the river and face the decision that will define the next stage of the journey. Which way do they go? They go after Merry and Pippin. They choose the living over the quest, the friends who can still be saved over the ring-bearer who has chosen to go alone. And the three of them, the man, the elf and the dwarf, begin the run that will take them across the plains of Rohan and into the heart of the war. Part 15. The Three Hunters. The pursuit of the Uruk-hai across Rohan is one of the great endurance sequences in literature, a forced march that covers nearly 150 miles in less than 4 days, pushing the limits of mortal endurance to the breaking point. Aragorn runs. Gimli runs. Legolas runs. But they do not run the same way. And the difference, the physical, visible, undeniable difference in how the three of them experience the run, tells us everything about what makes each of them who they are. Aragorn is the tracker. He reads the ground, the hoofprints, the broken grass, the traces of the Uruk-hai's passage across the plains. Aragorn sets the pace. Aragorn makes the decisions. Aragorn is the leader, the hunter, the being whose skills are most essential to the pursuit. Gimli is the endurer. The dwarf runs on sheer stubbornness, legs shorter than the others, body heavier, endurance rooted not in physical capability, but in the absolute granite-hard, dwarvish refusal to stop. Gimli does not run gracefully, he runs doggedly. He runs because stopping is not an option, because the hobbits are in danger, because the dwarf who started this race is going to finish it or die trying. Legolas is the watcher. He runs with an ease that is almost offensive, barely breathing hard, barely sweating, covering the ground with the light, effortless, seemingly weightless stride that is the physical expression of his elven nature. Legolas does not tire. Legolas does not struggle. Legolas runs the way a bird flies, naturally, without effort, as though the act of covering vast distances at speed were no more demanding than a walk in the garden. But Legolas's role in the pursuit is not merely physical. He is the eyes of the group. He scans the horizon. He spots the distant marks that Aragorn's mortal eyes cannot yet see. The shapes on the horizon that might be riders or enemies, or the fleeing Uruk-hai. Legolas's vision reaches further than any mortal's, and his reports, delivered while running without breaking stride, are the Fellowship's early warning system. The reconnaissance capability that keeps the three hunters aware of the landscape ahead. The contrast between Legolas and Gimli during the pursuit is the foundation of their friendship. The elf who runs without effort, and the dwarf who runs on pure will. The being who glides, and the being who grinds. The lightness and the weight. The two of them could not be more different, physically, temperamentally, culturally, racially, and the difference, instead of driving them apart, begins to pull them together. Legolas starts to admire Gimli's stubbornness. Gimli starts to respect Legolas's skill. The grudging respect of two warriors who have each discovered that the other is tougher than expected. This is the seed of the friendship. The pursuit also teaches Legolas something about the land of Rohan, the vast, open, treeless expanse of grassland that is unlike any landscape Legolas has previously inhabited. There are no trees, there are no forests. There is nothing above the horizon except the sky, the enormous, unobstructed, overwhelming sky that dominates the Rohan landscape and that makes the traveller feel simultaneously exposed and liberated. For a wood elf, the openness is disorienting. Legolas is a creature of the canopy, a being who has lived beneath the trees, whose visual world has always been framed by trunks and branches and leaves, whose sense of space has always been shaped by the enclosure of the forest. Rohan strips the frame away. Rohan reveals the full, unmediated, unfiltered expanse of the world, the horizon lines stretching in every direction, the grass rippling in the wind like a green ocean, the sky pressing down from above with a weight that the forest canopy usually carries. And Legolas adapts. He uses the openness. His elven eyes, designed to see through the dappled light of the forest, prove equally effective in the open grassland, scanning the horizon for threats, tracking the distant movement of the Uruk-hai, reading the landscape for the subtle signs that tell the story of the land's use and its history. The forest elf becomes a plains scout. The adaptation is seamless, instinctive, the expression of a capability that was always present, but that required the new environment to reveal itself. Part 16. The Riders of Rohan. The three hunters encounter the Riders of Rohan, Ormez Ord, 105 horsemen returning from a battle with the very Uruk-hai that the Fellowship is pursuing. The encounter is tense. Orma is suspicious. The three hunters are strangers, an elf, a dwarf, and a ranger, running across the plains of Rohan on foot, claiming to be pursuing orcs. The combination is unusual enough to justify suspicion. And there is a moment, a brief, charged, dangerous moment, when Orma makes a comment about Galadriel. He speaks of the Lady of the Golden Wood with suspicion, referring to the rumors that she is a sorceress, a dangerous enchantress, a being whose power is to be feared rather than trusted. Gimli responds with anger. The dwarf who entered Lothlorien as a septic has been transformed by his encounter with Galadriel, transformed by her beauty, by her kindness, by the way she spoke to him in the dwarven tongue, and treated him with the respect that no elf had ever shown him. Gimli is ready to fight Orma for the insult. The dwarf's hand moves to his axe, and Legolas puts an arrow to his string. Not aimed at Orma, not yet, but present, visible, a quiet demonstration that the elf will defend his companion if the confrontation escalates. This moment is extraordinary. An elf drawing a weapon to defend a dwarf. An elf threatening a man of Rohan, a potential ally, because the man insulted someone that the elf's dwarven companion cares about. The ancient enmity between elves and dwarves is being overwritten in real time by a new loyalty. A loyalty that is still forming, still tentative, still surprising to both parties, but that is real enough to make Legolas reach for his bow. The encounter resolves without violence. Orma tells them that the Uruk-hai have been destroyed. The riders attacked the orc band during the night, killed them all, and burned the bodies. The hobbits are not among the dead. Orma lends the three hunters horses, and they ride toward the edge of Fangorn Forest, where the battle took place, to search for signs of Merry and Pippin. Part 17. The Edge of Fangorn. The three hunters arrive at Fangorn Forest, and Legolas feels something that surprises him. Fangorn is old, older than Mirkwood, older than Lothlorien, older perhaps than any forest Legolas has ever entered. The trees of Fangorn are ancient, they carry the weight of ages in their branches, and the atmosphere of the forest is heavy with memory, with the accumulated experience of thousands of years of slow, patient tree-like existence. Legolas feels the forest. He senses the tree's awareness, the dim, vast, dreamlike consciousness that the trees of Fangorn possess, the consciousness that makes them something more than wood and something less than awake. The trees are thinking. The trees are remembering. The trees are carrying, in their rings and their roots and their gnarled, ancient bark, the memories of a world that existed before the elves came, and that will exist perhaps after the elves have gone. The experience is humbling for Legolas. He is an elf, a being who considers himself ancient, who has lived for centuries, who carries the weight of deep memory. But the trees of Fangorn are older than he is. The trees were here before his grandfather's grandfather. The trees remember things that no elf has ever seen. The early ages of the world, the time before the coming of the elves, the deep geological time that makes even elvish lifespans seem brief. Legolas enters Fangorn with something approaching awe. The wood elf, the forest creature, the being who grew up among trees and who loves trees, and who defines himself in relation to trees. This being enters Fangorn and discovers that there are trees that are beyond him. Trees that are deeper and stranger and more powerful than anything in Mirkwood. Trees that do not need the elves, that existed before the elves and that will continue after the elves have sailed west and left the mortal world behind. Part 18. The White Rider. In Fangorn, the three hunters find something they did not expect. Gandalf. The encounter is one of the great surprises in the story, the return of the wizard, the being who fell in Moria and who was, as far as the Fellowship knew, dead. Gandalf appears in the forest, white-robed, white-haired, radiant with a power that is greater than the power he possessed before. He is Gandalf the White. He has been sent back, returned from death to complete the mission that Saruman abandoned. Legolas is the first to recognize Gandalf. Or rather, Legolas is the first to sense something wrong with the old man they encounter in the forest. He nocks an arrow. He prepares to shoot. He senses, with the elven perception that operates beneath the level of conscious thought, that the being in front of them is more than he appears. That the old man is radiating a power that is too great for an ordinary mortal. That the white robes carry an authority that demands recognition. The recognition, when it comes, is a moment of joy that is unlike anything else in the book. Gandalf is alive. The being they mourned is standing before them, changed but present, diminished in familiarity but increased in power. The grief that they carried from Moria, the grief that sat on Legolas's shoulders like a physical weight, is lifted. Not removed, but transformed, transmuted from loss to wonder, from grief to gratitude, from the darkness of the Balrog's bridge to the white light of Gandalf's return. Gandalf tells them what has happened. He fought the Balrog for 10 days, up the endless stair, from the lowest dungeon to the highest peak, a battle of fire and shadow that raged through the roots and the summits of the misty mountains. Gandalf killed the Balrog. Gandalf died. And Gandalf was sent back by powers greater than himself, sent back to finish what he started, sent back wearing the white that Saruman stained, and carrying the authority that Saruman forfeited. For Legolas, Gandalf's return is a theological event. Legolas is an elf, a being who knows the Valar, who understands the divine hierarchy, who recognizes that Gandalf is a Maya and that the Maya's return from death is an act of divine intervention. The Valar have acted. The divine powers that sent the Astari to Middle-earth have reached into the mortal world and corrected a catastrophic loss. The return of Gandalf tells Legolas that the mission is still supported, that the powers behind the mission have not abandoned it, that the divine will is still engaged, that the journey is still worth making. The 3 hunters are now 4, and the 4 ride south, out of Fangorn, across the plains of Rohan, toward the golden halls of Edoras, where the king of Rohan sits under the shadow of Saruman's influence and the war is about to begin. Part 19. The Golden Hall. Edoras, the capital of Rohan. The Golden Hall of Meduseld, sitting on its hill above the plains, gleaming in the sunlight like a crown on the head of the land. Legolas enters the world of men. He has been in the world of men before, the wilderness, the plains, the open spaces between the elven kingdoms. But Edoras is different. Edoras is a city. A human city. A place built by mortal hands, governed by mortal laws, inhabited by mortal people who live mortal lives, and who experience the world at a pace and in a manner that is fundamentally different from the elven way. The culture of Rohan is a warrior culture, fierce, proud, horse-centered, defined by honor and by battle. The Rohirrim are a people of the open plains, a people whose identity is bound to their horses and their halls, and the songs they sing about the deeds of their ancestors. The culture is young by elvish standards, a civilization that has existed for a few centuries rather than a few millennia. Legolas observes. He watches the Rohirrim with the quiet, assessing, gently curious gaze of a being who has lived among elves and who is encountering a fundamentally different way of being. The Rohirrim are loud, they are physical, they are emotional in a way that is open and immediate and unguarded, expressing joy and grief and anger with a directness that elves, with their deep reserve and their millennia of emotional experience, typically do not display. The observation is not condescending. Legolas does not look down on the Rohirrim. He finds them fascinating, the raw energy, the vital, life-burning intensity of a people who know that their time is short and who fill every moment with as much living as the moment can contain. The Rohirrim are mortal. They know they are mortal, and the knowledge gives their lives an urgency, a heat, a passionate commitment to the present that the immortal elf finds both alien and beautiful. In Edoras, Gandalf frees Théoden from Wormtongue's influence. The king is restored. The old, broken, shadow-haunted man becomes the king again, straightening his back, lifting his head, reclaiming the authority and the dignity that Saruman's agent had stolen from him. The restoration is dramatic. It is moving. And it is, for Legolas, a demonstration of the resilience of mortal beings, the capacity of men to recover from devastation, to pull themselves back from the brink, to find strength in themselves that they did not know they possessed. Legolas watches the restoration and sees something he has not seen in the elven world: renewal. The elves do not renew. The elves fade. The elves diminish. The arc of elven existence in Middle-earth is downward, a slow, beautiful, irreversible descent from the heights of the Elder Days to the diminished twilight of the Third Age. But men renew. Men fall and get back up. Men break and mend. Men are mortal and fragile and impermanent, and precisely because of these qualities, men are capable of a kind of resilience that the elves cannot achieve. Part 20. The road to Helm's Deep. Théoden musters his forces and rides for Helm's Deep, the great fortress in the mountains, the stronghold where the people of Rohan have taken refuge in times of crisis for generations. The women, children, and elderly are sent to shelter in the glittering caves behind the fortress. The king rides to war. And Legolas rides with him. The ride to Helm's Deep is a journey through tension. Saruman's forces are already moving, raiding the Westfold, burning villages, driving refugees from the countryside. The reports coming in are grim. The scale of Saruman's army is larger than anyone expected. The fortress that has never fallen may be tested as it has never been tested before. Legolas rides among the Rohirrim, among the warriors of Rohan, the Horse Lords, the men who define themselves by their courage in battle and their loyalty to their king. He rides among a people who are preparing to face the possibility of annihilation, who know that Saruman's forces outnumber them by a factor of 10 or more, and who are riding to the fortress anyway, because the king is riding, because the fortress must be held, because there is nowhere else to go. And Legolas, riding alongside these mortal warriors, discovers something about them that changes his understanding of courage. The Rohirrim are afraid. They know what is coming. They are mortal men riding toward a battle that many of them will not survive, riding toward real, permanent, irreversible death. And the awareness is visible in the tightness of their jaws and the silence of the column and the way they grip their reins. And they ride anyway. The frightened men ride anyway. They follow the king. They prepare for the siege. They sharpen their swords and check their arrows and take their places on the walls with a courage that is not the absence of fear, but the overcoming of it. The mortal, death-aware courage that comes from knowing that you might die and choosing to fight regardless. Legolas does not fear death in the way that mortals do. Legolas cannot die of age or disease. Legolas faces battle with the calm of a warrior who has fought hundreds of engagements and who knows that death in combat is unlikely for someone of his skill. The Rohirrim do not have this calm. They have something else. Something that Legolas, with all his centuries and all his skill, does not possess: the courage of the mortal. The courage that is only possible when death is real. Part 21. The Deep. Helm's Deep. The great fortress. The battle that nearly ends the resistance of Rohan, and that introduces Legolas to the full horror of mortal warfare. The army of Saruman arrives at Helm's Deep, 10,000 Uruk high, armed and armoured and bred for battle, marching through the rain toward the ancient fortress where a few hundred defenders have taken their stand. The odds are overwhelming. The battle is, by every rational calculation, unwinnable. The defenders are outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that has been specifically designed to break fortresses and kill men. Legolas fights at Helm's Deep with a focus and an intensity that reveals the depth of his commitment to the mortals he has come to care about. The battle is the longest continuous combat sequence in the story. Hours of fighting, hours of killing, hours of standing on the walls and firing arrow after arrow into the mass of Uruk high that presses against the fortress like a dark tide. And it is at Helm's Deep that the friendship between Legolas and Gimli crystallises, hardens into the bond that will define both of their lives. The two of them compete. They count kills. They taunt each other, Legolas announcing his total with the calm precision of an elf, Gimli bellowing his own count with the savage enthusiasm of a dwarf in the middle of the fight of his life. The counting game is often played for comedy, and it is funny, the deadpan elf and the roaring dwarf, keeping score in the middle of a battle, treating the fight as a competition between themselves even as the world is ending around them. But the counting game is also something deeper. It is the language of friendship, the specific, personalized, mutually understood language that develops between two beings who have spent enough time together to know each other's rhythms, who have developed the shared jokes and the familiar patterns that mark the transition from acquaintance to friend. The counting game also serves a psychological purpose that is easy to miss. The Battle of Helm's Deep is terrifying. The numbers are overwhelming. The walls are cracking. The gate is breaking. The night is endless, and the rain is relentless, and the Uruk high keep coming and coming and coming, wave after wave, and the defenders are exhausted and bleeding and running out of arrows and hope. In this environment, the counting game is a survival mechanism. It is a way of imposing order on chaos, of turning the overwhelming, formless, terrifying reality of battle into a structured, manageable, almost playful activity. By counting kills, Legolas and Gimli reduce the battle to a game, a contest between friends, a challenge that can be measured and scored and discussed. The game transforms the horror into something bearable. The game gives the two warriors something to focus on besides the darkness and the death. The game also keeps them connected. In the chaos of battle, when the lines break and the formations scatter and every warrior is fighting alone in the dark, the counting game is a thread, a connection between Legolas and Gimli, a reminder that they are not alone, that the friend is nearby, that the competition is still running and that both of them are still alive. Every shouted number is a lifeline. I am here. I am fighting. I have not fallen. The battle is won, barely, narrowly, by the arrival of Gandalf and the riders of Rohan at the dawn. The fortress holds. The Uruk high are broken. And the Huorns, the half-awakened trees of Fangorn, devour the fleeing remnants of Saruman's army in the forest below the fortress. Gimli wins the count. The final tally, Gimli 42, Legolas 41. The dwarf beats the elf by a single kill, and the victory, however insignificant in the grand scheme of the war, is treasured by both of them for the rest of their lives. The count at Helm's Deep becomes part of their shared mythology, the story they tell each other, the reference point they return to, the memory that crystallizes the moment when the friendship became permanent. Legolas sees the Huorns. He senses them, the ancient, angry, vengeful tree spirits who have come to punish the destroyers of their forest. The Huorns are terrifying to the men and to Gimli. But to Legolas, the elf who grew up among trees, the Huorns are something else. They are justice. They are the forest's response to the being who cut down the trees and burned them in his furnaces. They are the natural world, rising up to defend itself against the being who violated it. Legolas watches the Huorns with something that the others in the fortress do not feel: recognition. The wood elf recognizes the Huorns' rage, the slow building, centuries deep, patient fury of trees that have been harmed. Legolas has seen this rage in Mirkwood. He has sensed it in the trees of his homeland, the anger of the forest at the darkness that was devouring it, the resentment of living things toward the force that was killing them. The Huorns are the expression of this anger made active. They are the trees fighting back. And Legolas, the being who has spent his entire life fighting alongside the trees, feels a kinship with the Huorns that none of the mortals around him can share. Part 22. The Road to Isengard. After the battle, Gandalf leads a company to Isengard to confront Saruman, to assess the damage, to deal with the fallen wizard in his ruined tower. And Legolas rides with them. The ride from Helm's Deep to Isengard takes the company through the Gap of Rohan and into the Circle of Isengard, and what they find there astonishes them. The fortress is destroyed. The Ents have torn it apart. The walls are broken. The pits are flooded. The industrial apparatus that Saruman spent decades building is rubble and mud and standing water. And sitting on the ruins, smoking pipeweed and eating from the pantry of Saruman's storerooms are Merry and Pippin. The reunion is one of the great moments of lightness in the story, a moment of joy and laughter and the specific, giddy relief of finding friends alive when you had feared they were dead. Legolas sees the hobbits and the tightness that has been sitting in his chest since Amon Hen, the tension of the pursuit, the grief of Boromir's death. The stress of the battle loosens. The hobbits are alive. The small, brave, surprisingly durable beings who were captured by the Uruk-hai have survived, escaped, met the Ents, and somehow ended up sitting on the ruins of the enemy's fortress, smoking and eating as though the whole war were a mild inconvenience. The encounter with the Ents is significant for Legolas. He meets Treebeard, or at least he observes Treebeard from a distance, sees the ancient Ent moving through the ruins of Isengard, hears the slow, creaking, wooden voice that speaks in a language older than any elven tongue. The Ents are the shepherds of the trees, the guardians, the protectors, the beings who were created to care for the forests in the days when the world was young. Legolas recognizes the Ent's significance. He recognizes, in Treebeard's ancient presence, the depth of time that the forests represent, the thousands of years of patient, watchful, tree-like existence that the Ents have lived through. The Ents are older than the elves. The Ents remember a world that the elves never saw. And the encounter with this ancient depth gives Legolas a perspective on his own longevity that is both humbling and illuminating. He is old, but he is not the oldest. The world is deeper than even an elf can know. Part 23. The Voice. The confrontation with Saruman at Orthanc is the first time Legolas encounters the Voice, the specific, seductive, supernaturally enhanced speech that is Saruman's most dangerous weapon. Saruman speaks from the top of his tower. He speaks to the company below, to Gandalf, to Thodin, to the riders and the warriors who stand in the ruins of his fortress and look up at the being who is responsible for so much suffering. And the voice is beautiful. The voice is warm. The voice is the sound of reason, the sound of understanding, the sound of a wise old friend offering good counsel. Legolas feels the pull. Even the elf, even the being whose nature provides a measure of resistance to the manipulation of will, feels the gravitational attraction of Saruman's speech. The voice is designed to bypass the rational mind and to speak directly to the emotional core, to the desire for peace, for safety, for the resolution of conflict, for the comfortable reassurance that everything will be all right. But Legolas also sees through the voice. His elven perception, the depth of awareness that allows him to read the mood of a forest, to hear the singing of stones, to sense the intentions beneath the surface of the world, allows him to detect the manipulation. The voice is a weapon. The beauty is a disguise. The warmth is a trap. Saruman is not offering peace. He is offering surrender, dressed up in the language of reason, decorated with the rhetoric of wisdom, but surrender nonetheless. Gandalf breaks Saruman's staff. The confrontation ends. And Wormtongue throws the Palantir from the tower, the seeing stone, the communication device that connected Saruman to Sauron. Pippin picks it up. Gandalf takes it, and the company rides away from Isengard with a weapon they did not expect, and a piece of intelligence they did not plan for. The ride from Isengard is the last peaceful passage that Legolas will experience for a long time. The road from Isengard to the next crisis is brief. Pippin looks into the Palantir, is seen by Sauron, and the urgency of the war accelerates to a pace that will not slow until the ring is in the fire. Part 24. The Summons. The war accelerates. Gondor calls for aid. The beacons of Gondor are lit, the chain of signal fires that stretches from Minas Tirith to Edoras, calling on Rohan to honor the ancient alliance and to ride to the defense of the White City. And Aragorn makes a decision that changes the trajectory of the war, and that sends Legolas on the most terrifying journey of his life. Aragorn decides to take the Paths of the Dead. The Paths of the Dead are a road that runs under the mountains, a tunnel, a passage, a route through the darkness that is haunted by the spirits of the dead men of Dunharrow. The dead men are the ghosts of an ancient people who swore an oath to Isildur and then broke it, who refused to fight when Isildur called on them to honor their alliance against Sauron. Isildur cursed them. He told them that they would have no rest until they fulfilled their oath, that they would linger in the darkness under the mountains, sleepless and unquiet, until the heir of Isildur called on them again, and they answered the call. Aragorn is the heir of Isildur. Aragorn can summon the dead. And Aragorn plans to do exactly that, to take the Paths of the Dead, to confront the ghosts, to command them to fulfill their oath, and to use the army of the dead to break the Corsairs of Umbar, the naval force that is threatening Gondor's southern flank. Legolas decides to go with Aragorn. The decision is not automatic. The Paths of the Dead are terrifying even for an elf. The dead are not orcs. The dead are not balrogs. The dead are spirits. Beings who exist outside the normal rules of the physical world, who cannot be fought with arrows or swords, who operate in a dimension that Legolas's warrior skills cannot reach. But Legolas goes. He goes because Aragorn is going. He goes because the mission requires it. He goes because the friendship, the bond between the elf and the ranger, the trust that has developed over the months of shared danger, is strong enough to carry him into a darkness that every instinct tells him to avoid. Part 25. The Paths of the Dead. The passage through the Paths of the Dead is, I think, the most psychologically demanding journey that Legolas makes in the entire story. More demanding than Moria, more unsettling than Helm's Deep, more terrifying than anything that the physical world can produce. The dead are present. They are in the tunnel, in the walls, in the air, in the darkness that presses against the company from every side. The dead are watching. The dead are following. The dead are filling the passage behind the living with a cold, rustling, whispering presence that is more horrifying than any orc horde because it cannot be fought. Legolas is afraid. The text does not say this explicitly, but the implication is clear. The elf who walked through Moria and fought at Helm's Deep and faced the Balrog is afraid of the dead. And the fear is different from the fear of the Balrog. The Balrog was terrifying because of its power. The dead are terrifying because of their nature. They are spirits, beings who have been stripped of their bodies, who exist in a twilight between life and death, who are trapped in the darkness by a curse that is older than the kingdoms of men. For Legolas, the encounter with the dead is an encounter with a form of existence that is both alien and uncomfortably familiar. The elves are immortal. The elves do not die of age or disease. But the elves can be killed, and the elven spirits, when they are separated from their bodies, go to the halls of Mandos, to the place of waiting, to the shadowy existence of the houseless spirit. The dead men of Dunharrow are a version of this. Spirits trapped outside their bodies, unable to rest, unable to move on, condemned to an existence that is neither life nor death. The passage through the paths of the dead is Legolas's encounter with the shadow side of immortality. The dead are what happens when the spirit cannot rest, when the obligations of the living world hold the spirit in place, when the curse or the unfinished business or the unfulfilled oath keeps the spirit anchored to Middle-earth even after the body has turned to dust. Legolas, who will one day face his own departure from Middle-earth, who will one day sail west, leaving the mortal world behind, walks through the tunnel and sees, in the dead, a glimpse of what it might mean to be trapped in a world that no longer belongs to you. The company emerges from the tunnel. The dead follow. And Aragorn leads the army of the dead toward the coast, toward the corsairs of Umbar, toward the ships that will carry them to the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Part 26. The Corsairs. The attack on the corsairs of Umbar at Pelargir is one of the pivotal moments of the war, and it is, for Legolas, the moment when everything changes. Aragorn and his company, the Grey Company, the Rangers of the North, and the 3 hunters arrive at Pelargir with the dead. The corsairs, the pirates, the raiders, the descendants of the Black and Menrians who have been harassing Gondor's coasts for generations, are anchored in the harbour, preparing to sail north to attack Minas Tirith from the river. The dead sweep through the corsairs like a wind through dry leaves. The ghosts are irresistible, not because they fight, but because the terror they project is absolute. The corsairs see the dead and they break. They flee. They abandon their ships. The harbour is taken without a battle, conquered by fear, by the projection of supernatural horror, by the weapon that no physical courage can resist. And Legolas hears the gulls. The gulls, the seabirds, the white, crying, circling birds that wheel above the harbour of Pelargir, calling with voices that carry across the water and into the air and into the deepest part of Legolas's elven soul. The sea longing awakens. Tolkien is very specific about this moment. He has Legolas describe the experience in his own words, the words that he sings later, the lament that he composes about the moment when the cry of the gulls reached him, and the sea longing stirred to the sea, to the sea. The white gulls are crying, the wind is blowing, and the white foam is flying. The sea longing is not a desire. It is a condition. It is a fundamental, species-wide, spiritually rooted yearning that lives in every elf. The yearning for the blessed realm, for the undying lands, for the home across the sea that every elf, whether they have seen it or not, carries in the deepest part of their being. The sea longing is the pull of the West, the gravitational attraction of the place where the elves belong, the call that draws every elf eventually, inevitably, irresistibly toward the grey havens and the ships that will carry them home. And the sea longing, once awakened, cannot be put back to sleep. Galadriel warned Legolas about this. In Lothlorien, Galadriel spoke to each member of the Fellowship privately, and to Legolas she gave a warning. If thou hearest the cry of the gull on the shore, thy heart shall then rest in the forest no more. The warning was precise. The warning was prophetic. And the warning has now come true. Legolas's heart will no longer rest in the forest. The elf who was born in the trees, who defined himself by the trees, who loved the forests of Middle-earth with the intimate, personal, species-deep love that is the sylvan elf's birthright, this elf has heard the cry of the gulls, and the cry has placed a hook in his soul that will pull him, eventually, inexorably, out of the forest and across the sea and into the west. Think about what this means for the battles that are still to come. Legolas is about to fight at the Pelennor. He is about to march to the Black Gate. He is about to stand at the threshold of Mordor and face the armies of the Dark Lord in the last battle of the Third Age. And he is going to do all of this with the sea longing singing in his heart, with the cry of the gulls echoing in his ears, with the pull of the west tugging at his spirit, with the knowledge that the forest can no longer give him rest, and that the only peace he will ever find is on the other side of the ocean. The sea longing is not a distraction, it is an amplifier. The sea longing intensifies everything, the beauty of the mortal world, the grief of mortal death, the significance of every moment and every landscape and every friendship. The sea longing is Legolas's wound. It is the wound that the journey inflicts, the price that the travel extracts. Legolas has walked across Middle-earth. He has seen mountains and forests and plains and rivers. He has fought in battles and befriended a dwarf and watched mortals die. And the journey has brought him, finally, to the one thing that will change him irrevocably, the sound of the sea. Part 27. The Battle of the Pelennor Fields. The ships captured from the Corsair sail north, up the Anduin, toward Minas Tirith, toward the battle that is already raging on the fields before the White City. And Legolas sails with them. The arrival at the Pelennor Fields is one of the great turning points of the war. The Battle of the Pelennor is going badly. The forces of Gondor and Rohan are overwhelmed. Thodin is dead, killed by the Witch King, crushed beneath his own horse, dying on the battlefield that he rode to defend. The Pelennor is a field of fire and blood and breaking lines, and the defenders are losing, and the darkness is spreading, and the war is about to be decided by the same mathematics of force that have governed every war in the history of the world. And then the ships arrive. The black sails of the Corsairs appear on the river, and the defenders despair, because the black sails mean more enemies, more attackers, more forces piled onto the already overwhelming onslaught. But the sails are not carrying enemies, the sails are carrying Aragorn, and Legolas, and Gimli, and the Rangers, and the levies of the southern fiefdoms of Gondor gathered by Aragorn during the ride from Pelagir. The banner unfurls, the banner of the White Tree and the Seven Stars, the royal banner of the House of Elendil, carried by Aragorn for the first time in public. And the tide turns, the defenders rally, the attackers waver, the battle swings. Legolas fights on the Pelennor. He fights with the bow of Lothlorien. He fights alongside Gimli, alongside Aragorn, alongside the men of Gondor and Rohan. He fights in the greatest battle of the Third Age, the battle that will determine whether the Free Peoples survive or fall, whether the world endures or is swallowed by the darkness. The battle is won. The forces of Mordor are driven from the fields. The city is saved, at a terrible cost, a cost measured in thousands of dead, in the body of a king, in the shattered walls of the First Circle, in the physical and emotional devastation that the battle has wrought on the defenders. Legolas walks the field after the battle. He sees the dead, men, orcs, horses, mackle, the enormous oliphants of the Haradrim that lie on the plains like fallen hills. The field is a landscape of death. And Legolas, the immortal, walks through the aftermath, steps over the bodies, sees the faces of the dead with eyes that will remember them forever. The memory is part of the price. Mortals forget. Mortals heal. Mortals lose the sharp edge of grief over time, as the years pass and the memories soften and the dead recede into the past. Elves do not forget. The elven memory does not dim. The faces of the dead on the Pelennor fields will be as clear in Legolas's memory 1,000 years from now as they are today. Sharp, precise, unfaded. A gallery of the fallen that will never be closed. Part 28. The Last Debate. After the Pelennor, the surviving captains hold a council. The last debate. The discussion that will determine the final move of the war. The debate is about strategy. Gandalf proposes the march to the Black Gate, the diversionary attack, the sacrifice play, the desperate gamble that will draw Sauron's attention away from the two hobbits who are crawling through Mordor toward Mount Doom. The march is not a strategy for victory. It is a strategy for delay. The captains are being asked to sacrifice their army, to throw their remaining forces against the gates of Mordor, and to die, if necessary, to buy time for Frodo and Sam. Legolas is present at the debate. He listens. He does not speak. But his presence is significant, because the decision to march to the Black Gate is, for Legolas, a decision to walk toward what may be the end of the world. The march to the Black Gate is different from Helm's Deep, different from the Pelennor. At Helm's Deep, the defenders were fighting for survival, for the specific, concrete, achievable goal of holding the fortress until help arrived. At the Pelennor, the attackers were fighting for victory, for the turning of the tide, for the salvation of the city. At the Black Gate, the army is fighting for time. They are fighting so that two hobbits can reach a volcano. They are fighting a battle they cannot win, in the hope that someone else can accomplish something that they cannot see and cannot verify and cannot guarantee. The decision to march to the Black Gate is, I think, the purest expression of hope in the entire story. And Legolas's participation in the march is his fullest expression of trust. He trusts Gandalf. He trusts Aragorn. He trusts the hobbits, the small, ordinary, apparently insignificant beings whose courage and whose goodness are the only things standing between the world and the darkness. Legolas marches because he has learned, over the course of the journey, to trust the small. The elf who grew up in the Woodland Realm, who was trained to fight the large threats, the spiders, the orcs, the great enemies that menace the forest, has learned through his travels with the Fellowship that the small threats are the ones that matter most. The hobbits matter. The ring matters. The individual acts of courage and loyalty and love that the small beings perform. These are the forces that will determine the fate of the world, not the armies and the fortresses and the great displays of power that Legolas's elven education taught him to value. Part 29. The Black Gate. The Morannon. The Black Gate of Mordor. The last destination before the end. The army of the West, 7,000 soldiers, led by Aragorn and Gandalf, with Legolas and Gimli among the captains, marches north from Minas Tirith through the blasted lands of Ithilien and the desolation of the Morannon. The march is grueling. The landscape is hostile, barren, poisoned, stripped of vegetation by centuries of Sauron's occupation. The land itself is an enemy, dry, waterless, windswept, the visible expression of the desolation that Sauron's rule produces. Legolas walks through this landscape and sees the inversion of everything he values. Where the elf loves forests, there are no trees. Where the elf loves water, there are no streams. Where the elf loves light, the sky is overcast, darkened by the fumes of Mount Doom, grey and oppressive and starless. The approach to the Black Gate is the anti-Lothrian, the complete, systematic, deliberate negation of every quality that makes a landscape beautiful and livable. The army arrives at the gate. The gate opens. The mouth of Sauron rides out. The ambassador, the diplomat, the being who speaks for the Dark Lord. The negotiation fails. The mouth of Sauron displays the tokens: Frodo's mithril coat, the elven cloak, a hobbit blade, and the implication is devastating. Frodo has been captured. The quest has failed. The ring is in Sauron's hands. Legolas sees the tokens. He recognizes the cloak, a cloak of Lothlorien, made by the elves of the Golden Wood, a piece of the elven world held up by the servant of the being who wants to destroy the elven world. The sight is painful. The implication is worse. If Frodo has been captured, then the ring is lost. If the ring is lost, then the world is lost. If the world is lost, then Legolas and Gimli and Aragorn and every being in the army of the West is about to die for nothing. Gandalf refuses the terms. The negotiation ends. And the battle begins. The Battle of the Black Gate is the final stand, the last battle, the climactic confrontation between the Free Peoples and the forces of Mordor. The army is surrounded. The Orcs are closing in. The Nazgul are circling overhead. The ground is shaking. The gate is disgorging the armies of Sauron in numbers that the defenders cannot hope to match. Legolas fights. He fires arrows into the press of enemies. He stands with Gimli and Aragorn and the soldiers of Gondor and Rohan. He fights the last battle of the Third Age, the battle that will determine whether the world survives or falls, whether the elves will have a future or whether the darkness will consume everything. And then the ring goes into the fire. The eagles have come. Frodo and Sam have reached Mount Doom. Gollum has bitten the ring from Frodo's finger and fallen into the crack of doom. And the ring, the One Ring, the instrument of domination, the device that has shadowed the world for 3,000 years, is destroyed. The eye falls. Barad Doctor crumbles. The Nazgul dissolve. The orcs break and flee. The earth shakes. The darkness lifts. And Legolas, standing on the field, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen, looking eastward toward Mordor as the Dark Tower collapses into itself, sees the end of the age. Part 30. The Eagles. The eagles come. They descend from the north, the great eagles of the misty mountains, led by Gwaihir the Windlord, riding the thermals above the battlefield, circling the ruins of the gate, driving the Nazgul from the sky. And the eagles carry Gandalf to Mount Doom, to the volcano that is erupting, to the slopes where Frodo and Sam are stranded, to the two hobbits who have done the impossible and who are now lying on a rock while the lava flows around them. Legolas does not go to Mount Doom. He remains at the Black Gate, among the survivors, among the wounded, among the living, who are beginning to understand that the war is over. He stands on the field and watches the eagles fly east. And he does not know. Not yet. Not until the eagles return with two small, unconscious figures in their talons, whether the hobbits are alive. The waiting is its own kind of ordeal. The battle is over. The enemy is defeated. But the fate of the two beings who made the victory possible, the two small, brave, impossible hobbits who walked into Mordor and destroyed the ring, is unknown. And Legolas waits. The elf who has travelled thousands of miles, who has fought in 3 great battles, who has walked through the paths of the dead and sailed up the Anduin and stood at the black gate of Mordor. This elf stands and waits and hopes that the hobbits are alive. They are alive. The eagles bring them back. Frodo and Sam are unconscious, exhausted, burned, half-starved, barely alive, but alive. The ring-bearers have survived. The mission is complete. And the war is over. Part 31. The Field of Cormallen. The army of the West retreats to the Field of Cormallen, a green field in North Ithilien, near the borders of Mordor, where the survivors gather to rest and to celebrate the victory. And on the Field of Cormallen, something happens that is, I think, one of the most emotionally powerful moments in the entire Lord of the Rings. A moment that is quiet and simple and that contains in its simplicity the full weight of everything that the journey has cost. Frodo and Sam wake up. They wake up in a tent, on clean beds, surrounded by the members of the Fellowship, by Gandalf, who is alive, by Aragorn, who is their friend, by Legolas and Gimli, who came for them, by Merry and Pippin, who survived their own ordeal. The reunion is complete. The 9 walkers, minus Boromir, who fell, are together again. The company that set out from Rivendell in December, that crossed mountains and forests and rivers and battlefields, that was broken at Amon Hen and scattered across the width of Middle-earth, this company is together again. On a green field in the spring sunshine, alive and free and victorious. Legolas sees Frodo and Sam. He sees the toll, the physical and spiritual toll that the ring has taken on the hobbit who carried it. Frodo is changed. The ring has marked him, has left scars that will never fully heal, wounds that will ache forever, a diminishment that the destruction of the ring could not reverse. Frodo carried the weight of the world, and the carrying has broken something inside him that cannot be mended. Legolas understands this. The elf who perceives the world at a depth that mortals cannot access sees the damage in Frodo, sees the shadow that the ring has left, the wound that will eventually drive Frodo to the Grey Havens and across the sea. Legolas recognizes, in Frodo's brokenness, a kinship, because Legolas too has been wounded by the journey. The sea longing awakened at Pelargir is Legolas's wound. Frodo's wound drives him west. Legolas's wound will drive him west too. Both of them, the hobbit and the elf, are beings who have been changed by the journey in ways that cannot be undone. Beings who will eventually have to leave Middle-earth because the journey has made it impossible for them to stay. Part 32. The Coronation. Aragorn is crowned King of Gondor. The ceremony takes place at Minas Tirith, the White City, the capital of the reunited kingdom, the seat of the power that Aragorn has claimed through his lineage and earned through his deeds. Legolas is present. The elf stands among the crowd, among the lords and the soldiers and the citizens of Gondor, and watches as the being he has travelled with, fought beside, bled with, and trusted with his life, ascends to the throne that has been waiting for him for 3,000 years. The coronation is a moment of triumph for the mortal world. It is the beginning of the Fourth Age, the Age of Men, the age in which the mortal peoples will assume the dominion of Middle-earth and the elves will withdraw to the west. The coronation is the pivot, the hinge on which the ages turn, the moment when the world stops belonging to the elves and starts belonging to men. Legolas watches and feels the pivot. He feels the turning of the age, the shift in the world's axis, the transfer of power and responsibility from the ancient to the young, from the immortal to the mortal, from the elves to men. The coronation is a celebration, but it is also a farewell. The king is crowned. The age begins. And the elves, Legolas's people, Legolas's civilization, Legolas's world, begin the long, slow, irreversible process of leaving. The White City itself impresses Legolas. Minas Tirith is the greatest achievement of mortal architecture in Middle-earth, 7 tiers of white stone rising from the plain, crowned by the Tower of Ecthelion, facing eastward toward the shadow that it was built to oppose. The city is a monument to mortal determination. It was built by the Dunedain, the men of the West, the Enmenrian exiles who brought the craft and the ambition of Menor to the shores of Middle-earth. The city has endured siege and war and the slow decline of Gondor's power. And the city is still standing. For Legolas, the sight of Minas Tirith provokes a complicated response. The city is beautiful. It is grand. It is an achievement that honors its builders and that justifies the pride of the people who inhabit it. But the city is also stone, cold, hard, lifeless stone, cut from the mountain and stacked in tiers and carved into a shape that serves the needs of men. The city has no trees, no gardens, no living things growing from the stone. The city is a triumph of mortal craft. It is also a landscape that is alien to a being who defines beauty in terms of the living and the growing. The contrast between the city and the forest deepens Legolas's understanding of the gap between elven and mortal sensibility. The elves build with living things, with trees, with gardens, with the slow cultivation of beauty that takes centuries. Men build with dead things, with stone and metal, and the cut timber that was once a living tree. Both approaches produce beauty, but the beauty is different. And the difference is a reflection of a deeper difference. The elves work with time, shaping beauty over centuries. Men work against time, building quickly because their lives are short, and the vision must be realized before the builder dies. Legolas is happy for Aragorn. The friendship between the elf and the man is genuine, rooted in shared experience, cemented by shared danger, deepened by the mutual respect of 2 warriors who have seen each other at their best and their worst. Legolas is proud of Aragorn. He is glad that the ranger has become the king, that the hidden heir has claimed his inheritance, that the man who slept in the wild and tracked the enemy through the wilderness is now wearing the crown of the greatest kingdom in Middle-earth. But the happiness is laced with loss. Because the king is mortal. The king will die. Aragorn will reign for 120 years, a long time by mortal standards, a blink of an eye by elven standards, and then Aragorn will be gone. The friend will be dead. The king who was crowned on this bright morning will be a memory, a name in the histories, a figure in the songs that Legolas will hear sung by the great-great-great-grandchildren of the people who are cheering today. The immortal watches the mortal ascend. And the watching contains both joy and grief. The joy of the moment and the grief of the knowledge that the moment is temporary. That the mortal world is temporary. That everything the immortal loves in the mortal world will eventually be taken by the one force that not even the most powerful elf can resist. Time. Part 33. Arwen. At the coronation, Arwen arrives. Arwen Undmiel, the even star of her people, the daughter of Elrond, the elf who has chosen to become mortal for love of Aragorn. Legolas sees Arwen. And Legolas understands, in a way that perhaps no one else present fully understands, the magnitude of what Arwen has done. Arwen has chosen mortality. She has given up the immortality that is the birthright of every elf, the endless life, the ageless existence, the eventual passage to the Blessed Realm, in order to stay in Middle-earth with the man she loves. The choice is irreversible. Arwen will age. Arwen will die. Arwen will experience the one thing that no elf is meant to experience: the ending of existence in the mortal world, the passage into the unknown that awaits all mortal beings. For Legolas, Arwen's choice is both beautiful and terrible. Beautiful because the love that motivates it is genuine. The love between Arwen and Aragorn is one of the great loves of the age, a love that has survived decades of separation and uncertainty, and that has now, with the crowning of the king, been consummated. Terrible because the cost is absolute. Arwen will never see her father again, will never rejoin her people in the Blessed Realm, will never know the peace and the restoration that await the elves who sail west. Legolas carries his own version of Arwen's dilemma. The sea longing is pulling him west. But the love of the mortal world, the love of Gimli, the love of Aragorn, the love of the forests and the rivers and the landscapes that he has walked through, is holding him in Middle-earth. Legolas, like Arwen, is caught between the immortal and the mortal, between the call of the west and the bonds of the east, between the place where he belongs and the place where his heart is. The difference is that Legolas will eventually resolve the dilemma by going west. Arwen has resolved it by staying. The elf prince will sail, the elf princess will die. Both choices are rooted in love. Both choices exact a cost that cannot be measured in mortal terms. Part 34. The departure of friends. After the coronation, the fellowship begins to disperse. The great company that was formed at Rivendell and that has been held together by the mission and the war is now free to go their separate ways, and the separation is painful. Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin return to the Shire. Gandalf rides with them for a time before departing on his own errands. The hobbits ride north, back to their homes, back to their gardens, back to the small, ordinary, precious world that they fought to save. Legolas watches them go. The elf watches the hobbits ride away and feels the specific, tender, bittersweet grief of parting from beings whose mortality makes every parting potentially the last. Legolas will live forever. The hobbits will not. The next time Legolas sees them, if he sees them, they will be older. Changed. Closer to the end that waits for all mortal beings. The parting from Aragorn is also painful, though the pain is tempered by the knowledge that Aragorn's reign has just begun, and that there will be years, decades, of contact between the elf and the king. Aragorn is the one mortal in Legolas's life, whose remaining lifespan is long enough to provide some comfort. 120 years of friendship, of visits, of the continued connection that sustains the bond. But the most significant parting, or rather, the most significant non-parting, is with Gimli. Legolas does not leave Gimli. The elf and the dwarf, who began the journey as enemies, who spent the first days of the fellowship glaring at each other across the council table, who were separated by thousands of years of racial enmity and mutual distrust, they do not part. They stay together. The decision is remarkable. An elf and a dwarf, choosing to remain in each other's company after the war, choosing to travel together, to explore together, to share the post-war world as companions. The decision defies every historical precedent. It contradicts every expectation. It overturns every assumption about the relationship between the two races. And it tells us that the journey has changed Legolas in a way that nothing before the journey could have accomplished. The elf who entered the quest as a son of Thranduil, as a product of the Woodland Realm, with all the prejudices and the instincts and the assumptions that the Woodland Realm instilled. This elf has been remade by the road. The road has broken the old patterns. The road has replaced the ancient enmity with something new. Something that has no precedent, no template, no model in the long history of elf-dwarf relations. Part 35. The Glittering Caves. After the war, Legolas and Gimli make a pact. A promise, exchanged between friends. That is one of the most touching agreements in the entire Lord of the Rings. Gimli promises to visit Fangorn Forest with Legolas. Legolas promises to visit the glittering caves of Aglarond, the caverns behind Helm's Deep, with Gimli. Each promises to enter the other's world, to experience, with an open heart and an open mind, the thing that the other loves most. The pact is the fullest expression of their friendship. The willingness to set aside personal preference, personal comfort, personal aesthetic judgment, and to enter a world that is alien and uncomfortable, because the friend loves it, and because the friend's love makes it worth seeing. Legolas visits the caves. Gimli leads him into the underground, into the caverns that glow with crystallized light, that reflect the torchlight from 1,000 facets of stone, that create a subterranean beauty that is unlike anything Legolas has ever experienced. And Legolas is moved. The elf who loves the open sky, who loves the wind and the leaves and the stars, this elf enters the underground and finds beauty. Not the beauty he expected, not the beauty he would have chosen, but beauty nonetheless, a different kind of beauty. A beauty that belongs to the world beneath the surface. A beauty that the elf's inherited prejudice had blinded him to. The experience changes Legolas's understanding of the world. The forest is not the only place where beauty lives. The sky is not the only source of light. The elven way of seeing, the tree-centered, star-centered, surface-dwelling perspective that the wood elves have cultivated for millennia, is not the only way of seeing. There is a dwarven way of seeing that is equally valid, equally rich, equally capable of perceiving beauty in the world. Gimli visits Fangorn. The dwarf who mistrusts trees, who feels uncomfortable in forests, who prefers the solid reassurance of stone and the familiar enclosure of the underground, this dwarf enters the oldest forest in Middle-earth, and, guided by Legolas, finds something he did not expect: wonder. The trees of Fangorn are ancient. They carry the weight of the world's memory, and the dwarf, walking among them with the elf at his side, discovers that the living world above the ground has its own kind of grandeur. A grandeur that is different from the grandeur of stone, but no less real. The mutual visits are the completion of the friendship, the proof that the bond between Legolas and Gimli is not merely a wartime alliance, but a genuine meeting of souls. Each enters the other's world. Each finds beauty in the other's domain. And the finding bridges the gap, the ancient millennia-old gap between elf and dwarf, between the lovers of trees and the lovers of stone. Part 36. Ithilien. After the war, Legolas makes a decision that reveals the depth of his attachment to the mortal world. The decision to stay. Legolas establishes a colony of elves in Ithilien, the fair land east of the Anduin, the territory that borders Mordor to the west, the land that has been ravaged by decades of Sauron's occupation, and that needs, desperately, to be restored. The decision is extraordinary. The elves are leaving Middle-earth. The Fourth Age is the Age of Men. The elven kingdoms are emptying, Lothlorien is fading, Rivendell is diminishing, the grey havens are filling with elves seeking passage west. The tide of elven departure is flowing strongly, and every instinct, every tradition, every cultural expectation tells Legolas that he should be joining the flow, sailing west, following his people, leaving the mortal world to the mortals. And Legolas does the opposite. He gathers elves, sylvan elves, wood elves, the tree-loving, forest-dwelling elves of his own kind, and he leads them to Ithilien. He brings them to a land that has been scarred by war, and he begins the work of healing it. He plants trees. He restores the gardens. He brings the elven gift for cultivation and renewal to a landscape that has been stripped of beauty by the enemy's occupation. The decision to stay is rooted in love, not the cosmic, spiritual, species-wide love that draws the elves to the blessed realm, but the specific, personal, earthly love that Legolas has developed for the mortal world through his travels. Legolas loves Middle-earth. He loves its forests and its rivers and its landscapes. He loves its people, the mortals, the dwarves, the hobbits, the ordinary beings who populate the world and who give it the vitality and the warmth that the immortal blessed realm may lack. And Legolas loves Aragorn. The King of Gondor is his friend. Ithilien is part of Gondor's territory. By establishing a colony in Ithilien, Legolas places himself near Aragorn, near the friend, near the king, near the mortal, whose reign represents the best of what the mortal world can achieve. The colony in Ithilien is Legolas's way of staying close to the thing he loves, while the pull of the sea longing tries to drag him away. The colony is also Legolas's gift to the world he is leaving. The elves of Ithilien bring beauty. They bring restoration. They bring the specific, irreplaceable elvish capacity for making things grow, for encouraging the land to heal, for coaxing the forests back from the devastation that Sauron's occupation inflicted. The colony is Legolas's contribution to the mortal world, his way of saying, I was here. I walked through this world, and I left it better than I found it. The work of restoration in Ithilien is, I think, the most revealing expression of Legolas's character in the entire story. Not the archery, not the battles, not the legendary combat skills that make him one of the most dangerous warriors in Middle-earth. The restoration. The planting of trees, the patient, careful, season by season, work of bringing a devastated landscape back to life. The restoration connects Legolas to his origins. He is a wood elf. He is a being whose nature is oriented toward the care of growing things. In Mirkwood, that nature was expressed as defense, as the fight to preserve the existing forest against the encroaching darkness. In Ithilien, the nature is expressed as creation, as the building of something new, the cultivation of beauty in a place that has been stripped of beauty, the planting of a future that Legolas himself will not remain to see. The colony in Ithilien is the proof that Legolas's travels have not merely consumed him, have not merely taken from him and left him diminished. The travels have also produced something. The elf who entered the fellowship as a warrior exits the story as a gardener. The being who spent the war killing orcs spends the peace planting trees. The transformation is quiet. It does not announce itself. But it is, I think, the deepest change that the journey produces. The change from destroyer to creator, from fighter to healer, from the being who takes life to the being who gives it. Part 37. The sea longing deepens. The sea longing does not diminish. It deepens. Year by year, decade by decade, the pull of the West grows stronger. The cry of the gulls, heard once at Peligir, echoing in Legolas's memory with a clarity that does not fade, and an urgency that does not ease. The sea longing is a condition of Legolas's existence after Peligir. Every sunset reminds him of the West. Every breeze from the coast carries the salt smell of the sea. Every bird that flies westward is a messenger, an emissary from the blessed realm, calling him home, reminding him that the home he has never seen is waiting for him. And the sea longing is in tension with everything else that Legolas values. The forest that he planted in Ithilien, the friendship with Gimli, the relationship with Aragorn, the colony of elves who followed him to the mortal world. The work of restoration, of healing, of bringing beauty back to a land that was ravaged by war. All of these things hold Legolas in Middle-earth, anchor him to the mortal world, give him reason to stay, provide the counterweight that keeps the sea longing from pulling him across the sea. But the counterweight is temporary. The forest will grow without him. The colony will endure, or it will fade. Aragorn will die in 100 years, in 120. The king will lay down his life, and the mortal friend will pass beyond the circles of the world. Gimli will die. The hobbits have already died or will die soon. One by one, the anchors that hold Legolas in Middle-earth will be cut, not by violence, not by betrayal, but by the simple, irreversible, unstoppable passage of mortal time. The sea longing knows this. The sea longing is patient. The sea longing can wait, because the sea longing is eternal and the anchors are mortal, and the eternal always outlasts the mortal. One day, the last anchor will be cut. The last friend will die, the last reason to stay will be gone, and Legolas will sail. Part 38. The Passing of the King. Aragorn dies in the year 120 of the Fourth Age, the 120th year of the reign of King Elisar. Aragorn lays down his life. He does not die of illness. He does not die of injury. He dies by choice. Aragorn possesses the gift of the in-memoriam kings, the ability to choose the moment of his own death, to lay down his life voluntarily, to depart from the world with dignity and intention, rather than waiting for the decay and the diminishment that time inflicts on mortal bodies. Aragorn dies in the arms of Arwen. He dies surrounded by his family, his counsellors, the people he has served and loved and protected for 120 years. He dies at peace with his life, at peace with his legacy, at peace with the knowledge that he has done what he was born to do. Legolas is not present at the death. The text does not place him at Aragorn's bedside. But we can be certain that Legolas knows, that the news reaches him in Ithilien, that the elf hears of the king's passing and feels the specific, devastating grief of losing a friend who has been a constant in his life for over 100 years. The death of Aragorn is the severing of Legolas's strongest anchor. Aragorn was the reason Legolas stayed. Aragorn was the friend, the king, the mortal, whose presence in the world made Middle-earth worth inhabiting. With Aragorn gone, the world is different, emptier, smaller, stripped of the one mortal presence that made the immortal willing to stay. The sea longing, which has been building for 120 years, building with every sunset, every gull cry, every westward wind, intensifies. The counterweight is gone. The anchor is cut. The pull of the west, no longer balanced by the pull of the friend, becomes overwhelming, and Legolas makes his decision. He will sail. Part 39. The ship. Legolas builds a ship, a grey ship, an elven ship, crafted in the elven manner, light and graceful and built for the crossing that every elven ship is built for, the passage across the sundering seas, the voyage from Middle-earth to the Blessed Realm, the one-way journey that carries the elves from the mortal world to the immortal. The building of the ship is an act of craft, an expression of the same elven gift for making that has produced the great works of elvish civilization, the jewels, the songs, the forests, the kingdoms. Legolas builds his ship in Ithilien and sails it down the Anduin to the sea, using the skills that the Sylvan elves possess by nature and by tradition. The ship is not large. It does not need to be large. It is a ship for two. For two. Because Legolas does not intend to sail alone. The decision to bring Gimli is unprecedented. No dwarf has ever sailed to the Blessed Realm. No dwarf has ever been invited. No dwarf has ever been permitted to cross the sundering seas and to enter the land of the Valar and to stand in the presence of the divine powers that created the world. The prohibition is not explicit. Tolkien does not describe a rule that forbids dwarves from sailing west. But the tradition is clear: the straight road, the path that leads from the mortal world to the blessed realm, is an elven road. It was made for the elves. It was maintained for the elves. The ships that sail the straight road are elven ships. The passengers who travel the straight road are elves. Legolas intends to break this tradition. He intends to bring a dwarf, his friend, the being who has shared his life for over a century, across the sea and into the blessed realm. The intention is audacious. It is unprecedented. It is the kind of act that would have been unthinkable to the Legolas who arrived at the Council of Elrond and glared at Gimli across the table. But the journey has changed Legolas. The journey has broken the old patterns. The journey has taught Legolas that the ancient enmities and the inherited prejudices and the racial boundaries that his upbringing instilled are not the final truth, that friendship transcends race, that love overrides tradition, that the bond between two beings who have walked through fire together is stronger than any prohibition. Part 40. The Dwarf Who Went West. Gimli agrees to go. The dwarf who spent his life underground, who loves stone and metal and the dark, enclosed mineral world of the dwarven halls, agrees to board a ship and sail across an ocean he has never seen to a land he has never imagined. Why does Gimli go? The answer is Galadriel. And the answer is Legolas. Galadriel, the Lady of the Golden Wood, the elf who spoke to Gimli in the dwarven tongue, and who treated him with kindness when no other elf had ever treated a dwarf with kindness. Galadriel, who gave Gimli 3 strands of her golden hair, the gift that he asked for, the gift that moved the elf lady to tears, the gift that represents the healing of the ancient wound between elves and dwarves that stretches back to the First Age and the making of the Silmarils. Gimli wants to see Galadriel again, the dwarf who fell in love, not romantically, but with the pure, selfless, adoring devotion that the medieval knight feels for the queen, wants to see the being who changed him, who opened his heart, who made him believe that beauty was not limited to stone, and that love was not limited to his own kind. And Legolas, the friend, the companion, the elf who walked beside Gimli across the width of Middle-earth, who fought beside him at Helm's Deep and Pelennor Fields and the Black Gate, who entered the glittering caves with an open heart, and who found beauty in the underground, because Gimli loved it. Gimli goes because the 2 strongest bonds in his life, the bond with Galadriel and the bond with Legolas, lead west. The mortal world has little left for Gimli. The dwarven halls are diminishing. The great works of the dwarven civilization are fading. The friends are dead or dying. The world is moving on. The 4th Age is the age of men, and the dwarves, like the elves, are passing into memory. Gimli boards the ship. He takes his place beside Legolas. And the 2 of them, the elf and the dwarf, the archer and the axeman, the walker on snow and the stubborn runner, the being of light and the being of stone, prepare to sail. Part 41. The Last Shore. Legolas sails from Ithilien. The ship leaves the coast of Middle-earth and enters the open sea, the sundering seas, the wide water that separates the mortal world from the immortal, the barrier that no mortal being was ever meant to cross. The departure is Legolas's final act in the mortal world. He leaves behind the forests of Ithilien, the trees he planted, the gardens he cultivated, the landscape he healed. He leaves behind the colony of elves who followed him from the Woodland Realm. He leaves behind the graves of Aragorn, of the hobbits, of the mortal friends who filled his life with warmth and meaning during the brief, bright years of the Fourth Age. And Legolas sails into the west with the sea longing fulfilled at last. The cry of the gulls, heard at Pelagier, has led him here, across 120 years of waiting, through decades of service and friendship and the slow cutting of the mortal anchors, to this moment, the ship on the water, the wind in the sails, the west on the horizon. The sailing is both an arrival and a departure. It is the arrival at the home that Legolas has never seen, the Blessed Realm, the Undying Lands, the place where the elves belong and where the weariness of the mortal world can be healed. And it is the departure from the home that Legolas has always known. Middle-earth, the forests, the mountains, the rivers, the landscapes that he has walked through and fought for and loved for centuries. The ship carries two passengers, the elf and the dwarf. The last of the fellowship, the last two members of the company that set out from Rivendell so long ago. The last two beings who remember the snow on Caradhras and the dark of Moria and the golden light of Lothlorien and the grass of the Pelennor and the black gates of Mordor. Everyone else is gone. Frodo sailed west at the end of the Third Age. Gandalf went with him. Aragorn is dead. Boromir died at Amon Hen. Sam died after a long life as Mayor of the Shire. Merry and Pippin died in Gondor, where they spent their final years. The 9 walkers have been reduced to 2, and the 2 are now sailing toward the last destination, the final port, the shore beyond the shore. Part 42. The Straight Road. The Straight Road is not a metaphor. In Tolkien's cosmology, the Straight Road is a literal path, a road through the sky, through the upper atmosphere, through the space between the curved mortal world and the flat, preserved, removed from the world Blessed Realm. When Imenor was destroyed and the world was made round, the Blessed Realm was removed. Lifted out of the physical world, separated from Middle-earth by the reshaping of reality. The mortal world became a sphere. The Blessed Realm became unreachable, except by the Straight Road, the one remaining path that connects the round world to the flat world that was removed. The Straight Road is open to the elves. The elven ships, blessed by the Valar, can find the path, can leave the curved surface of the sea and travel the straight line that leads upward and westward, through the mists and the barriers, to the shores of the Blessed Realm. The path is invisible. It is perceptible only to the elven mariners who have been given the grace to find it. It is the last bridge between the mortal and the immortal, the last connection between the world that changes and the world that endures. Legolas finds the path. The ship lifts from the sea, or rather, the ship continues straight while the sea curves away beneath it. The mortal world drops behind. The mists close. And Legolas, looking forward, sees what no wood elf born in Middle-earth has ever seen, the shores of the Blessed Realm. The sight is beyond description, not because Tolkien describes it, but because the magnitude of the experience exceeds the capacity of language. Legolas has spent his entire life in a world of shadows, a world where the beauty is faded, where the light is filtered, where the glory of the original creation is dimmed by the corruption that Morgoth inflicted on the world. The Blessed Realm is the world without the dimming. The Blessed Realm is the beauty without the shadow. The Blessed Realm is the original design, the world as it was meant to be, the world before the marring, the world that the elves remember in their songs and their stories and their deep ancestral species-wide memory. And Legolas sees it. The elf who walked through Mirkwood's darkness, who crossed the mountains and the plains and the battlefields of the mortal world, who heard the gulls at Pelagier and felt the sea longing awaken, this elf sees the blessed realm and knows at last what the longing was for. Part 43. Gimli in the Blessed Realm. What happens when a dwarf arrives in the Blessed Realm? Tolkien does not tell us in detail, but the implications are extraordinary. Gimli is, as far as we know, the only dwarf ever to enter the Undying Lands. The honor is unique, unmatched in the history of the dwarven race, unprecedented in the relationship between dwarves and the divine powers. Gimli stands where no dwarf has stood before, sees what no dwarf has seen before, experiences what no dwarf has experienced before. And we can speculate about what draws Gimli most powerfully: Galadriel, the Lady of the Golden Wood, who has returned to the Blessed Realm, who has rejoined the elven lords in the Undying Lands. Gimli's devotion to Galadriel, the pure, selfless, adoring devotion that is one of the most beautiful emotional threads in the entire Lord of the Rings, finds its fulfillment in the Blessed Realm. The dwarf who asked for 3 strands of golden hair and who received them with a reverence that moved the elf lady to tears. This dwarf now stands in the lady's presence again, in the land of eternal beauty. And the devotion that has sustained him through the long years of the Fourth Age is rewarded. The arrival of Gimli in the Blessed Realm is the final completion of the healing that began at Lothlorien. The ancient enmity between elves and dwarves, the grudge that stretches back to the First Age, to the Silmarils, to the sack of Doriath, to the murder of Thingol, is resolved. Not by treaty, not by negotiation, not by the formal reconciliation of diplomatic representatives. By friendship, by the bond between one elf and one dwarf, forged on the road and tested in battle and sustained through decades of shared experience. The friendship heals the wound. The friendship bridges the gap. The friendship accomplishes what thousands of years of history could not: the bringing of a dwarf to the Blessed Realm, carried there by the love of an elf. Part 44. The map of the journey. Let me trace the full map of Legolas's travels. The complete, end-to-end, first step to last step geography of his journey through Middle-earth and beyond. Mirkwood, born in the Woodland Realm, in the northern reaches of the Great Forest, under the canopy of the trees that his people have guarded and loved for millennia. The starting point. The origin. The high pass. The crossing of the misty mountains, from east to west, carrying the news of Gollum's escape from the Woodland Realm to Rivendell. The first great passage. The first crossing of a mountain range. The first experience of the wider world beyond the forest. Rivendell, the hidden valley of Imladris, the seat of Elrond, the place where the council is held and the fellowship is formed. The turning point, the place where Legolas stops being a messenger and becomes a member of the company that will determine the fate of the world. Hollin, the ancient elvish land of a region south of Rivendell. The land where the rings were forged, where the stones remember the elves, where the landscape mourns the departure of the beings who gave it meaning. Caradhras, the Redhorn, the mountain that cannot be crossed. The place where Legolas walks on snow and the Fellowship is defeated by winter. Moria, the Black Pit. The underground kingdom of the dwarves. The place where Gandalf falls and the Balrog rises and Legolas drops his arrow in terror. Lothlorien, the Golden Wood. The place where Legolas feels at home, the preserved, protected. Galadriel's sustained elven forest that represents everything Mirkwood used to be. The Anduin, the Great River. The passage south in elven boats through the landscape of men. The Argonath, the approach to the decision that will break the Fellowship. Amon Hen, the Hill of Sight, the place where Boromir dies and the Fellowship shatters and the 3 hunters begin their pursuit. The Plains of Rohan, the 150-mile run across the grasslands, chasing the Uruk-hai, meeting the riders of Rohan. Fangorn Forest, the ancient wood. The meeting with Gandalf the White. The encounter with trees older than the elves. Edoras, the Golden Hall, the world of men, the warrior culture, the horse lords, the vital, mortal, brave civilization of the Rohirrim. Helm's Deep, the fortress, the battle, the counting game with Gimli, the Huorns in the forest. Isengard, the ruined fortress. The reunion with the hobbits. The voice of Saruman, the Palantir. Dun Harrow, the camp of the Rohirrim, high in the mountain, the marshalling point for the ride to Gondor. The paths of the dead, the tunnel under the mountains, the ghosts, the passage through the realm of the dead men of Dun Harrow, Pelagia, the harbour, the corsairs, the gulls, the sea longing awakened, the Pelennor fields, the great battle, the black sails, the turning of the tide, Minas Tirith, the White City, the coronation, the wedding, the departure of friends, the Black Gate, the Morannon, the last battle, the fall of the Eye, the field of Cormallen, the reunion, the celebration, the counting of the cost, Ithilien, the colony, the trees, the restoration, the decades of service and friendship, the coast, the ship, the departure, the straight road, the passage between worlds, the blessed realm, the arrival, the end of the journey, from Mirkwood to the undying lands, from the forest of shadows to the land of eternal light. The complete travels of Legolas Greenleaf, a journey that spans the width of Middle-earth and the depth of the mortal and immortal worlds. Part 45. The landscapes he changed. Legolas did not merely pass through these landscapes. He changed them, or more precisely, his passage through them changed the relationship between the landscapes and the peoples who inhabited them. In Mirkwood, Legolas was a defender. He fought to preserve the forest, to hold back the darkness, to maintain the borders of the Woodland Realm against the encroaching shadow. His relationship with Mirkwood was the relationship of a guardian, a being whose purpose was to protect the place, to fight for it, to ensure its survival. In Lothlorien, Legolas was a visitor. He entered the Golden Wood as a guest, as a traveller passing through, as a member of a company on a mission. His relationship with Lothlorien was the relationship of a pilgrim, a being who comes to a sacred place, who is moved by the experience, who carries the memory of the place with him when he leaves. In Rohan, Legolas was an ally. He fought for the Rohirrim, for a people who were not his people, in a land that was not his land, against an enemy that threatened both their civilizations. His relationship with Rohan was the relationship of a friend, a being who comes to help, who fights beside you, who leaves when the fight is over, but who remains in your memory as the stranger who stood with you when you needed someone to stand. In Ithilien, Legolas was a healer. He brought elves to a wounded land. He planted trees in a devastated forest. He restored beauty to a landscape that had been stripped of beauty by the enemy. His relationship with Ithilien was the relationship of a gardener, a being who tends the land, who nurtures the growth, who invests his time and his love in the slow, patient, generation-spanning work of making the earth beautiful again. In the Blessed Realm, Legolas is a returnee. He arrives at the place where his spirit has always belonged, the place that the sea longing has been calling him toward, the home that he has never seen, but that every elf in the deepest part of their being recognizes. His relationship with the Blessed Realm is the relationship of a child coming home, a being who has been away for a very long time and who arrives, at last, at the place where the weariness can be set down and the journey can end. Each landscape shaped Legolas, and Legolas shaped each landscape. The travels are not one-directional. They are exchanges, reciprocal transformations in which the traveller is changed by the place and the place is changed by the traveller. Legolas leaves a trace on every landscape he crosses. and every landscape leaves a trace on Legolas. Part 46. What's the journey cost? Let me count the costs. Because the journey was not free. The journey extracted payment. From Legolas's peace of mind, from his relationships, from his connection to the world he was born in, from his ability to rest in any one place and call it home. The first cost was innocence. Legolas entered the Fellowship as a being whose experience of evil was limited to the localized, manageable, familiar evil of Mirkwood, the spiders, the orcs, the shadow that pressed against the borders of his father's kingdom. The journey introduced Legolas to evil on a scale that Mirkwood's experience could not have prepared him for. The Balrog, the armies of Isengard, the battlefields of the Pelennor, the Black Gate of Mordor. The journey showed Legolas the full scope of the darkness, the global, civilization-threatening, world-ending darkness that the localized evil of Mirkwood was only a symptom of. The second cost was the sea longing. Before Pelargir, Legolas could rest. Before Pelargir, Legolas could find peace in a forest, could sit beneath a tree and feel the contentment that comes from being in the right place at the right time. After Pelargir, the contentment was broken. The cry of the gulls placed a splinter in Legolas's soul that could never be removed, a permanent, unhealing wound that turned every peaceful moment into a reminder that the peace was temporary, that the longing was always there, that the sea was always calling. The third cost was grief. Legolas accumulated grief the way a mortal accumulates years, steadily, inevitably, with each passing decade adding another layer to the weight. The grief of Gandalf's fall, the grief of Boromir's death, the grief of the soldiers who died at Helm's Deep and Pelennor Fields and the Black Gate, the grief of Thodin, the grief of the hobbits growing old in the Shire, the grief of Aragorn dying in Minas Tirith, the grief of every mortal friend who aged and declined and departed while Legolas remained, unchanged, watching the world lose the people he loved one by one by one. The fourth cost was home. Legolas cannot go home. Mirkwood, Greenwood the Great, restored to its original name after the war, when the shadow of Dol Guldur was finally lifted, is no longer the place that Legolas left. The forest has changed. The world has changed. The elf who returns to Mirkwood after the War of the Ring is not the same elf who left it. The journey has changed him too much. The sea longing has altered his relationship with the forest. The ancient, deep, intimate connection between the elf and the trees has been disrupted by the cry of the gulls, and the disruption is permanent. Part 47. What the journey gave. But the journey also gave. And what it gave was, I think, worth the cost. The journey gave Legolas Gimli. The friendship with the dwarf, the impossible, unprecedented, tradition-shattering friendship that began with hostility and ended with a shared voyage to the Blessed Realm, is the greatest gift that the journey bestowed. Gimli changed Legolas. Gimli taught Legolas that the world is wider than the forest, that beauty lives in places the elves have never looked, that the ancient enmities are lies, and that the ancient prejudices are prisons, and that the being standing next to you, however different, however unexpected, however uncomfortable, might be the person who matters most. The journey gave Legolas the mortal world. Before the journey, Legolas knew the elven world, the forest, the trees, the timeless rhythms of an immortal existence. The journey introduced him to the mortal world, to the urgency and the warmth and the fierce, burning, life-consuming intensity of beings who know that their time is short. The mortals taught Legolas that brevity is not a deficiency. The mortals taught him that the shortness of mortal life is not a tragedy, but a catalyst. A force that compresses experience into intensity, that makes every moment matter, that gives each day a weight and a significance that the endless days of immortal existence cannot match. The journey gave Legolas the full experience of Middle-earth. Before the journey, Legolas knew Mirkwood. After the journey, Legolas knew the world, the mountains and the plains and the rivers and the cities and the battlefields and the caves and the forests and the harbours. The journey expanded his understanding of the place he was born in, transformed his narrow, forest-centered perspective into a wide, comprehensive, world-spanning awareness that encompassed the full breadth of Middle-earth and all its peoples and all its landscapes. The journey gave Legolas the Blessed Realm. Without the journey, Legolas might have remained in Mirkwood, might have stayed in the forest, content in the trees, untouched by the sea longing, undisturbed by the call of the west. The journey awakened the longing. The longing drove the sailing. And the sailing carried Legolas to the home he never knew he was missing, to the Blessed Realm, to the undying lands, to the place where the weariness of Middle-earth can be healed and the grief of the mortal world can be set down. Part 48. The Friendship as Legacy. The friendship between Legolas and Gimli is the lasting legacy of the Fellowship, the one product of the journey that outlives the war and the age and the mortal world itself. The other relationships of the Fellowship are bounded by mortality. Aragorn's friendship with the hobbits ends when the hobbits die. Gandalf's bond with the Fellowship ends when Gandalf sails west. The mortal members of the company are limited by their mortal spans. Each friendship, however deep, however genuine, is a temporary arrangement, a connection that exists within the borders of a human lifetime. But the friendship between Legolas and Gimli transcends these borders. The elf and the dwarf remain friends for over 100 years, through the entirety of the Fourth Age, through the reign of Aragorn, through the slow emptying of the elven kingdoms and the gradual fading of the dwarven halls. The friendship outlasts empires. The friendship outlasts ages. And the friendship crosses the final border. When Legolas sails west, he brings Gimli with him. The friendship follows the elf to the Blessed Realm, the friendship that began at the Council of Elrond, that was forged in the darkness of Moria and the fire of Helm's Deep, that was deepened by the mutual visits to the glittering caves and Fangorn forest, that was sustained through decades of mortal time. This friendship crosses the sea and enters the immortal world. The friendship is the proof that the journey was worth it. All the costs, the innocence lost, the sea longing awakened, the grief accumulated, the home abandoned. All of these costs are balanced by the friendship. The elf who entered the Fellowship as the son of Thranduil, carrying his father's prejudices and his people's enmities, leaves the mortal world as the friend of a dwarf, a transformed being, a being who has been changed by the road, and by the companion who walked the road beside him. The transformation is Legolas's greatest travel, greater than the crossing of the misty mountains, greater than the passage through Moria, greater than the ride across the Pelennor or the march to the Black Gate. The greatest journey that Legolas makes is the journey from enmity to friendship, the inner crossing, the bridge built inside his own heart, the passage from the old world of inherited hatreds to the new world of chosen love. Part 49. The Elf Among Mortals. Legolas's time in the Fellowship taught him what it means to be immortal among mortals, and the lesson is one that most elves never learn, because most elves never place themselves in the position that Legolas occupied. Most elves keep their distance from mortals. The elven kingdoms, Rivendell, Lothlorien, the Woodland Realm, are separated from the mortal world by geography, by language, by culture, by the invisible barriers that the elves maintain between themselves and the short-lived peoples. The separation is protective. It shields the elves from the grief of mortal friendship. from the pain of watching friends age and die, from the heartbreak of forming bonds that mortality will inevitably sever. Legolas broke through this separation. He joined the Fellowship. He walked among mortals. He ate with them, slept beside them, fought beside them, mourned with them. He formed bonds that the separation was designed to prevent, bonds with hobbits and men and a dwarf. Bonds that were deep and genuine, and that would, over time, exact the grief that the separation was meant to avoid. The experience made Legolas unique among the elves of his generation. He understood mortals in a way that most elves did not, understood their courage, their warmth, their capacity for joy in the face of death, their ability to find meaning in lives that are, by elven standards, breathtakingly brief. The understanding enriched Legolas. It expanded him. It gave him a perspective on the world that the tree-centered, star-centered, age-spanning elven perspective could not provide. But the understanding also wounded him. Because understanding mortals means understanding mortality, understanding the specific, individual, personal reality of death, the way it comes for each person differently, the way it takes the brave and the cowardly alike, the way it respects no bond and no love and no protest. Legolas understood mortality because he watched it happen, watched Boromir die at Amon Hen, watched the soldiers fall at Helm's Deep, watched Théoden die on the Pelennor, watched Aragorn lay down his life in Minas Tirith. The understanding was earned through witness, and the witnessing was painful in a way that the elven separation was designed to prevent. Part 50. The significance of movement. Legolas moves. This is the defining quality of his character throughout the story. The quality of movement, of passage, of the continuous, restless, ever-forward motion that carries him from one end of Middle-earth to the other. The movement is physical. Legolas walks, runs, rides, sails, climbs. He covers distances that would exhaust a mortal army. He crosses mountain ranges and plains and rivers and forests with the tireless, unflagging, seemingly inexhaustible energy that is the physical expression of his elven nature. But the movement is also spiritual. Legolas moves through the story emotionally, traveling from prejudice to friendship, from innocence to experience, from the narrow perspective of the Woodland Realm to the wide perspective of the world traveler. His inner journey mirrors his outer journey. Each landscape he crosses changes him. Each experience he has reshapes his understanding of the world and his place in it. And the movement is existential. Legolas is moving through the mortal world toward the immortal world, passing through Middle-earth on his way to the Blessed Realm, touching everything, seeing everything, experiencing everything, before the final departure carries him to the place where the movement ends and the rest begins. The movement makes Legolas the ideal chronicler of the War of the Ring, the being who sees everything because the being goes everywhere. Legolas's travels take him through every significant landscape, every major battle, every pivotal moment of the war. He is present at Rivendell and Moria and Lothlorien and Helm's Deep and Pelennor and the Black Gate. He sees the beginning and the end and everything in between. He is the witness, the being whose presence at every crucial juncture makes him the living record of the journey that saved the world. Part 51. The last of the Fellowship. Legolas and Gimli are the last of the Fellowship. When they sail west, the company is complete. The 9 walkers have all reached their final destinations, scattered across the mortal and the immortal worlds, separated by death and by distance, but united by the memory of the journey that brought them together. Gandalf sailed west at the end of the Third Age, with Frodo and Bilbo and the Elven Lords. The Mire returned to the Divine Realm. The mission was over. The wizard who came to Middle-earth as an old man in a grey robe went home as a white-robed power. His task complete, his service ended. Frodo sailed with Gandalf. The ring-bearer, too wounded by the ring to find peace in the mortal world, crossed the sea and entered the blessed realm, seeking the healing that Middle-earth could not provide. Frodo's departure was the most poignant of all. The hobbit who saved the world could not live in the world he saved. The cost of the ring was a wound that would never heal in mortal lands. Sam died in the Shire. The most faithful companion, the being who carried Frodo up the slopes of Mount Doom, lived a long and full life, mayor of the Shire, father, grandfather, a respected and beloved member of his community. Sam died at peace. And then, according to tradition, Sam too sailed west, the last of the ring-bearers, crossing the sea to rejoin Frodo in the Blessed Realm. Merry and Pippin died in Gondor. The two cousins spent their final years in the south, in Minas Tirith, near the tomb of Aragorn, near the memory of the king they served. They were buried together, as they had lived together, side by side, the inseparable pair, the two hobbits who rode with the Rohirrim and fought at Pelennor Fields and marched to the Black Gate. Boromir died at Amon Hen, the first mortal loss. The man who was brave and flawed and human, who fell to the ring's temptation and then redeemed himself by dying in the defense of the hobbits. Aragorn died in Minas Tirith. The king, the friend, the mortal who lived the longest and who mattered the most. And now Legolas and Gimli sail. The last two. The final pair, the elf and the dwarf, carrying the memory of all the others, carrying the story of the Fellowship into the immortal world where the story will be remembered forever. Part 52. The meaning of the travels. What do Legolas's travels mean? What does the complete, end-to-end, Mirkwood to Blessed Realm journey tell us about the world that Tolkien created and about the beings who inhabit it? The travels tell us that the world is worth seeing. Every landscape that Legolas crosses is beautiful. Not always obviously, not always safely, not always in the way that the traveller expects, but beautiful. The darkness of Moria is terrible, but the halls of the dwarves are grand. The fields of the Pelennor are soaked in blood, but the sunrise over the battlefield is magnificent. The approach to the Black Gate is a wasteland, but the courage of the soldiers who march through it is sublime. Legolas's travels are a catalogue of beauty, a comprehensive world-spanning inventory of the beautiful things that Middle-earth contains, even in its darkest moments. The travels tell us that the world is worth fighting for. Legolas fights for Middle-earth, fights in battles, fights in forests, fights with arrow and knife and the absolute commitment of a being who has decided that the world, however flawed, however threatened, however diminished by the shadow, is worth preserving. The decision to fight is a decision to love, a declaration that the world, with all its imperfections, contains enough beauty and enough goodness and enough meaning to justify the effort of its defense. The travels tell us that friendship changes everything. Legolas enters the Fellowship as a product of his culture, shaped by the Woodland Realm, carrying his father's prejudices, viewing the world through the lens of elven tradition. The travels break the lens. The friendship with Gimli replaces the old perspective with a new one, a perspective that is wider, richer, more inclusive, more capable of seeing beauty in the unexpected places. The travels teach Legolas that the world is not divided into elven and non-elven, into friend and enemy, into beautiful and ugly. The world is one, a single, interconnected, mutually dependent whole that contains beauty in every corner, in every culture, in every being who has the eyes to see it and the heart to appreciate it. Part 53. The Traveller's Goodbye. Legolas's travels end at the shore of the Blessed Realm. The elf who walked through Middle-earth, who crossed mountains and forests and rivers and plains, who fought in battles and made friends and planted trees and heard the cry of the gulls, arrives at last at the place where the walking stops. The arrival is not narrated. Tolkien does not describe what Legolas sees when the ship reaches the Blessed Realm. He does not describe the shore. He does not describe the greeting. He does not describe the moment when the elf who has been travelling for centuries sets foot on the land where the travelling ends and the rest begins. The silence is appropriate. The arrival is private. It belongs to Legolas, to the elf and the dwarf, to the two beings who have earned the arrival through the journey, to the travellers who have covered every mile of the road and who deserve the dignity of an unobserved arrival. But we can imagine the elf stepping from the ship onto the white shore. We can imagine the dwarf beside him, stumbling probably, unaccustomed to the motion of the sea, steadied by the elf's hand on his arm. We can imagine the light of the Blessed Realm, the light that is not filtered by the shadow, the light that is the original, unmarred, Ilvatar-created light of the world. We can imagine the trees of the Blessed Realm, trees that have never been darkened, never been felled, never been burned in the furnaces of the enemy. Trees that are what Mirkwood's trees were before the shadow came. Trees that speak and sing and remember in a language that Legolas has been listening for his entire life. We can imagine the elf among the trees, the wood elf, the forest creature, the being who was born in the forest and who has travelled the entire width of the world and who has come home at last, home to the forest that was always waiting, home to the trees that were always calling, home to the place where the elven heart finds rest. Part 54. The Complete Travels. Legolas Greenleaf, son of Thranduil, prince of the Woodland Realm, member of the Fellowship, friend of Gimli, traveller, from the dark boughs of Mirkwood to the white shores of the Blessed Realm, from the forest of shadows to the forest of light, from the narrow paths of the Woodland Realm where every tree was a friend and every shadow was an enemy, to the wide roads of Middle-earth, where the friends and the enemies were not always who you expected them to be, through Moria, where the darkness was deeper than any darkness he had known, through Lothlorien, where the beauty was brighter than any beauty he had imagined, through the paths of the dead, where the spirits of the unforgiven whispered in the tunnel walls, through the Pelennor, where the blood of men and orcs stained the grass of the great field, through the Black Gate, where the world nearly ended and was saved by the smallest beings in it. Legolas saw all of this. Legolas walked all of this. Legolas carried all of this. In his memory, in his heart, in the deep, unfading, elven archive of experience that never dims and never distorts, and never lets the past become less than what it was. The complete travels of Legolas are the complete experience of Middle-earth. Every landscape, every battle, every friendship, every loss, every beauty, every shadow, every moment of courage, and every moment of grief, gathered into a single life, and carried across the sea to the place where the memories can rest. Thank you for walking this road with me. Legolas's journey is a journey that most of us take in some form. The journey from the narrow place where we were born to the wide world, where we discover who we are and who we might become. The journey from prejudice to understanding. The journey from the familiar to the unknown. The journey from the home we were given to the home we choose. Legolas chose the Blessed Realm, but the choosing was only possible because the journey came first. Because the elf walked every mile, crossed every mountain, survived every battle, and loved every friend. The destination matters. but the road matters more. Until next time.